Okay, so it summoned trees. Shaggy muttered. Trees I can't phase through. Ephemera said from her position on the floor where she had fallen. Great. So now what the hell do we do? We can't fit around them. Before Shaggy could answer her question, the vault room they were standing in shook violently. Shaggy originally thought it was the silent alarm triggering something else. But it was the trees again. Thick brown-colored arms grew from the side of the trees and slammed into the stone floor. Their bark-covered fingers tore into the ground as they used their newly formed arms to lift themselves out of the ground. Arboreal Knights! Roald shouted. Shaggy wanted to ask more about the trees, but they had finished dragging themselves from the ground. The tops of their branches raked across the ceiling, causing leaves and twigs to fall to the surrounding ground. They stood on gnarled, root-like feet and shook themselves. The bark on the front of the trees congealed into a flat surface and split apart, revealing a dark void behind sharp bark-colored teeth. Roar! The trees roared as one. Okay. We are fighting trees. Anyone have any fire? I can melt one. Maybe. But it'll take a while, Blobby said, sounding sleepy. You do that. Ephemera, you're still on the kid. The rest of us focus on the trees. He felt his two pack members nod in agreement, but Chromia and Ephemera had to give more vocal affirmations as Blobby just burbled. Growing his claws, Shaggy lunged for the nearest tree that was still roaring in defiance at the world. But again Shaggy bounced off some unseen thing. His attack didn't go unnoticed though, as the enormous tree he had been aiming at stopped screaming to glance down at him. Like it was swatting a fly buzzing around its head, the Arboreal Knight swung a branch-like arm at Shaggy. Dashing backwards, Shaggy heard a shattering sound. Like glass being broken as the tree's arm hit something and smashed through it. Shaggy didn't have time to think of what it could have been as the surprisingly nimble tree monster rushed forward, branches flailing. Shaggy did his best to dodge, but in the small vault room, he had little space. Especially with the others fighting around him. He saw Rita hack away at some oncoming branches as his face was covered in leaves and he felt something strike his abdomen. Shaggy was lifted from the ground and thrown bodily across the room as the tree monster struck him hard. He rolled across the ground a short distance before popping back up and taking stock of everything. Blobby was eating a tree while the others were fighting the other two. Rita and Cekrass were breaking and chopping whatever limb came their way, as Chromia was in full metal mode and punching away at the base of the tree. Roald was speeding toward the vault door. No longer hindered by whatever shield had been around the trees. Shaggy moved to help Chromia as the tree monster she was fighting grew spike branches and tried to stab her instead of batting her around. Duck an errant swipe from some leafy branches, Shaggy came up against the tree's bark-covered body and thrust his claws forward. Expecting the feeling of his claws sinking into the bark, Shaggy was surprised that all he felt was pain. His claw-like fingers were shunted to the side as he tried to dig them into the tree's body. They chipped pieces of the bark skin away, but did very little damage. He growled in frustration and backed away as a spike-like branch tried to impale him. Nearby, Chromia punched a limb into pieces as she tried to get closer, but the tree apparently considered her a bigger threat. So it was sending multiple branch-like arms at her. Shaggy made a mental note to increase his claw's sharpness and shifted his claws back into hands. Grimacing, he rushed back into the body of the tree and started punching. But again, all he got was pain. After a few strong jabs, he had to back away again, dodging tree branches the whole way. His hands were broken, and while there was a good patch of bark now missing from the tree, it would not be enough. Shaggy sighed and looked around. Rita was having the same problem as he was. Her sword couldn't penetrate the body of the tree. Cekrass was simply breaking any limb that came his way. Blobby was now almost covering the entire third tree with its stretchy, blue body. The vault door was slightly open and Shaggy could see light coming from inside. He was contemplating making a run for it, when he felt a painful spiked tree limb go through his thigh. "Pay attention, Wolfman!" Chromia shouted angrily as she ripped a tree branch in half. Shaggy ripped the branch spike from his legs and growled back at the woman. He felt completely useless. His claws weren't enough to do any real damage. As he thought about the problem, another limb swung at him and he angrily grabbed at it. Snapping it in two, Shaggy had a thought and rushed for the tree's body again. But instead of attacking the base of the tree, Shaggy climbed up into its branches. He felt the wooden limbs of the tree try to bend inward to get at him. But the shorted branches couldn't reach. Ignoring the others shouting at him, Shaggy settled himself near a large branch and sat with his back against the tree. With all of his strength, he kicked both of his legs downward at the place where a large branch connected to the tree. The tree monster shook and screamed as Shaggy heard the branch creak and bend. More little branch spikes tore into his body, and he grimaced through the pain as he kicked again. Black ichor ran from the crack in the tree's large branch as Shaggy kicked again. This time, the branch was split off from the base. Barely connected, it hung limply from the tree, which went absolutely crazy. Arg! Shaggy had to hold on for dear life as the night did its best to shake him off. Large gushes of black liquid rushed out of the spot he had broken. Shaggy guessed he had just done the tree equivalent of ripping the tree's arm off. Soon the tree monster slowed down and Shaggy loosened his grip on it. The night was moving slower as Shaggy climbed up to another branch and prepared to do the same thing. The tree's smallest limbs did their best to stop him, but he could just snap them as they attacked. Using his legs again, Shaggy severed another large tree branch at the base. The tree monster roared in defiance again, but slumped over. As the tree branches withered and the leaves turned brown and then gray, Shaggy leapt to the floor. Blobby was now covering the third tree entirely, and it was slowly being melted away. Chromia had moved to help Rita and Cekrass as they worked to rip all the tree branches away. Shaggy noted that it was probably a better idea to get rid of the attacking branches before you dove into the tree itself. He looked down at his own body and saw multiple welts and bruises across his bare chest. His pants also had large holes in them from where he was stabbed with wooden spears from the tree. His fighting style really was get hurt until he won. Ruaware. The last tree gave a mournful wail as the others started snapping its largest branches. With no way for it to defend itself now, Cekrass and Chromia set about turning the thing into kindling. Rita was watching over them, making sure the errant branches didn't attack. With the fight now somewhat over, Shaggy waved a hand at the others, showing he was going toward the vault. Rita gave him a thumbs up, but Cekrass and Chromia were too busy to reply. Blobby just burbled as the large tree in its mass flailed ineffectually. As Shaggy approached, he heard Ephemera's voice from inside the vault. "I don't see how. Boss is going to be pissed. Oh, to hell with that wolfman. He's going to be dead in a few seconds, anyway. Arboreal nights are pretty tough." Shaggy stuck his head around the large circular vault door and searched for the little shit. But what he saw brought him up short. The vault was empty save for the three of them and a large metal exosuit in the middle of the room. The suit was just over 8 feet tall and 5 feet across at the shoulder. Sleek gunmetal gray panels covered its surface and a large seat sat in the middle of its body. Shaggy could guess who the seat was for, judging by its size, and he did not like the idea of that. Who was going to be dead? Shaggy growled menacingly. Roald spun around from what he was doing, obvious surprise in his eyes. "How? Wha? Yo." Shaggy noticed that Roald was holding some kind of tool and had apparently been working on the exosuit. The young man shook visibly as Shaggy marched forward. Ephemera stood still, watching Roald as Shaggy approached. Shaggy could make out a small laptop on a stand near the exosuit and guessed that the kid was in the final stages of preparing the exosuit for operation. Shaggy raised his eyebrows as he loomed over the kid. Roald seemed to come out of his fear as Shaggy stopped in front of him. Sneering up at the taller Shaggy, Roald waved the tool around angrily. "You would have killed me as soon as we got to Undertown," Roald shouted. Shaggy rubbed a hand across his face. "Again. Why?" "Pfft. Like you types need a reason. I needed my suit, and you needed a way out. Win-win. It would have been. But you had to go and promise my crew and I more riches. So now we have to alter the deal." Roald stepped back. What does that mean? Shaggy just grinned as Ephemera's voice spoke up from behind Roald. Who? This thing is cool. I do not know how it works, but I bet we'll get a decent price for it. Ephemera had snuck around the two of them and was now in the Exosuit's large seat, pressing buttons. Shaggy hadn't planned on that to happen, but it worked really well with what he had been telling the boy, so he went with it. As Roald sputtered angrily at the woman in his machine, Shaggy put a hand on the boy's shoulder. See? We took on a job to get you to and in this vault. The payment was going to be the various bits of firepower and money we found here. But now, it appears you can't pay us. So what do you think is going to happen? Roald turned to Shaggy, purple-faced with anger. You can't have Sheila. Shaggy raised an eyebrow at the Exosuit's name. Okay. You can keep Sheila. Ah, boss. Ephemera complained. But, you have to give us something for the work we did today. But we also need to go. For all we know, one of your brother's goons is on their way. So we are going to take you and Sheila to Undertown, and there you are going to explain to my entire gang what you are going to do for us. Understand? Roald pursed his lips angrily and looked ready to continue arguing. But Chromia's angry voice broke the surrounding silence. She stomped her way over to Roald as Rita and Cekrass came into the vault excitedly. Their excitement drained away as they glanced around the empty vault. Shaggy had to move out of an angry Chromia's way as she gripped Roald by his collar and lifted him bodily from the floor. Roald tried to sputter a response as he flailed in the air. Shaggy put a hand on Chromia's arm and nodded agreeably. I was just explaining that to him. Apparently, this vault only housed Ephemera's new toy there. So we were thinking of taking that as collateral until we can be adequately compensated. Chromia grimaced and dropped the alien teen. Turning to Shaggy, she argued. You know you won't be able to trust anything the kid makes you if you keep his toy from him. Maybe not. But the alternative is to kill him here and have the Raks after us for attacking Donnie, Raks' brother. Right now, it just looks like the kid stormed the vault and got his toy back. Which may be unlikely, but it at least keeps us out of it. Now we need to go. Crouching down to a coughing Roald, Shaggy grew his claws and pointed one right at the teen's pink face. Now how do we move Sheila? We need to get out of here. Boss? Blobby's not done eating yet. Rita said from the vault door. Then get him to hurry up. For all we know, the silent alarm is blaring away and we need to get gone as soon as possible. The sounds of footsteps behind him told Shaggy that Rita was following his orders. Roald finished coughing and glanced around angrily. Coming to a decision, he struggled to stand. Shaggy gripped the rotund boy's shoulder and lifted him bodily from the ground. Roald threw off Shaggy's hand and called to Ephemera. Hit the green button and turn the yellow knob to a vertical position. Oh, and make sure you are out of the suit when you do it. Ephemera stared at the boy for a few seconds before she hopped out of the exosuit seat and followed his instructions. When she was done, the suit started to shake and Ephemera jumped back, surprised. But the suit merely rattled for a few seconds before it started to rapidly shrink. Once it was the size of a toy, the suit stopped shrinking and Roald walked over to it. Shaggy was about to ask how Roald was going to unshrink the suit, but Roof shook again. I am getting sick of things shaking all the damn time recently. Shaggy growled. It's never been good. Ephemera agreed. They left the vault to find Rita and Blobby standing next to a half-eaten tree monster. Blobby was melting a few branches in its body as Rita stared at the ceiling, clearly uneasy. Once Shaggy and the others joined her, the older woman grimaced. Boss, I think it's time to go. Shaggy nodded in agreement and pointed at the bags of stuff they had gotten from Silas' shop. Grab our shit and let's get out. Where's the transporter we need, Roald? It's a displacer. Roald corrected angrily from his reacquired chair. It's hidden behind a false wall in the wine cellar. We can get to it through the kitchen. Okay, folks. Back topside and into the kitchen. Keep a lookout for any big scary bastards. Donnie Raks might have sent someone at us. If we meet anyone, we tell them we are from a different gang. Got it? The others all nodded as Cekrass and Blobby gathered up their stolen loot. Shaggy wondered if anyone was going to ask about Silas, but when no one did, he kept his own mouth shut. He would keep an eye out for the old man, but they couldn't go out of their way right now. Not if they were on the clock like they thought they were. Shaggy waited for everyone to get ready before he led the way back out of the vault, praying that they had gotten away with everything. That's impossible. Clearly it isn't. At least now we know what that sound was. Silas, how did you miss this? I was reading my book. Shaggy groaned and pointed. Dude. There's a piece of the second floor missing. How could you not notice that? They were standing in the foyer staring at the place the front wall used to be. The front area of the house had fully collapsed. The large wooden doors were crushed and a light breeze blew bits of the debris across the tiled floor. Shaggy thought he could see the culprit off in the distance, but the skies around Austin were darkening to orange with the setting sun. All he could make out was a large humanoid shape throwing punches at random things. This can't have happened. Roald yelled, still not accepting the obvious. But it did. Now show us the way to the kitchen, damn it. Chromia shouted back. Yeah, we need to go. There's no way your brother missed this, Ephemera said, checking a nearby door for the entrance to the kitchen. He noticed. Another voice came from the top of the stairs. Shaggy and the others spun and looked up the stairs at the newcomer. A green-skinned man in a nicely tailored suit was descending the staircase. He drew a handkerchief from his breast pocket and cleaned his glasses while he continued speaking. His voice was deep and refined, but still somewhat menacing. Master Roald, I must say, your brother will be incredibly disappointed in your chosen companions. Even if you are attempting to escape, you could do better than this brand of ne'er-do-wells. Shaggy grew his claws and snorted at the pompous ass. But Roald seemed incredibly worried as his chair whirred toward the staircase. Angelo, they were kidnapping me. I swear. I wasn't trying to escape. Hey. Angelo merely finished cleaning his glasses and put them back on his face. I have no doubt that is the story that your brother will want propagated. But please, Master Roald, we both know what has occurred here. You hired these street toughs to break in and rescue you from the evil Raku crime family. Shaggy gave a mental sigh as he heard Angelo's assessment of events. So long as the Raks didn't think they were from Undertown, they could make a break for it and be fine. However, the guy had also seen their faces, so he was going to have to go at some point. Shaggy crouched low and waited for the right time to strike. Chromia had gone full metal, Rita had her sword in hand, Ephemera was gone, and Cekrass was setting down his bags. Angelo stepped off the stairs and glanced at all of them before snorting derisively. Ignoring them all, he approached Roald and leaned over the chubby teen's chair. Shaggy thought he could see small tusks jutting from the man's lower jaw. Master Roald, these attempts grow beyond tiresome. We will have to re-evaluate your living arrangements once your brother has returned. Roald glared up at the Orc-man and sneered. But before he could say anything, Shaggy launched himself. He had heard enough, and they were wasting time. They needed to get out as quickly as possible. Shaggy flew through the air, arms extended, claws aimed right at Angelo's midsection. But before he could make contact, Angelo pivoted on a leg and kicked out. The kick caught Shaggy mid-flight and sent him careening toward the stairs. Shaggy had just enough time to grunt in pain before he felt himself smash into and then through the staircase. He felt his spine crack and shouted in pain again as he took in what had just happened. He felt his bones snap back into place and heard the sounds of shouting as everyone followed his lead. Growling, he dug himself out of the ruined staircase and back into the main room. Rita was unconscious on the ground near the north wall. Roald was searching for something in his chair again. Cekrass was picking himself up as Chromia and Blobby harassed Angelo. Shaggy saw parts of the orc's suit light up with runes as he blocked Chromia's metal fists. Blobby's blue tentacles seemed useless as they batted against Angelo's arms and legs. Shaggy leapt from the debris and aimed another swipe at Angelo's face. But he failed again as the orc spun away and grabbed Shaggy's arm. Shaggy was lifted from the ground and felt his legs break as they smacked into something metal. Probably Chromia. Shaggy was then tossed unceremoniously again. As he waited for his legs to heal, Shaggy watched as Chromia was throwing a few haymakers at Angelo, but her opponent dodged and ducked around her swings. Blobby had given up swatting at the green gangster and was slowly approaching to swallow the guy. Angelo slammed a fist into Chromia's metal belly, and Shaggy saw the runes on the man's sleeve light up again. Chromia collapsed to all fours as Angelo retracted the punch. She was coughing and retching as Blobby crawled closer. Angelo glanced at the blob and reached down. Picking up Chromia, Angelo spun and threw the woman into Blobby's amorphous form. Blobby had to stop to disgorge the woman, but before he could, Angelo tapped something on his sleeves. Shaggy stood as the orc made some weird hand gestures. Suddenly, Angelo was spouting fire from his hands straight at Blobby. Blobby sizzled and popped as it gave an otherworldly scream. Aha! Blobby tried to roll away, but Angelo kept the stream of magical fire up. Shaggy didn't launch himself this time. He came in with a straight right to the side of Angelo's head. The orc slipped the punch but also stopped the fire attack. Angelo kicked out again, but Shaggy backpedaled and swiped a claw at the man's leg. The white runes on the man's black suit lit up again and Shaggy felt his claws slide along the man's leg. Hiya! Angelo sighed as he stepped in and punched at Shaggy's head. Shaggy ducked the punch and grabbed the arm. Going for a hip toss, Shaggy stepped in and tried to get his thigh under Angelo's hip. But the orc backed up and dragged Shaggy with him. Shaggy tried to fight it, but Angelo was much too strong. Shaggy let go of the arm and spun with both claws out, aiming for Angelo's face. But again, the orc seemed way too fast as he dodged backward toward the stairs. A blur of yellow slammed into Angelo's side as he was glaring at Shaggy, and Cekrass lifted the orc bodily from the floor. Shaggy nearly cheered as Cekrass slammed Angelo to the floor. Not missing his chance, Shaggy ran in and delivered a kick straight to Angelo's prone face. The orc's head snapped back violently and his glasses went flying. Shaggy and Cekrass stomped on the downed Angelo. But the man's suit was still flashing with those runes. Shaggy felt that whatever damage they were doing was being mitigated by that suit. He reached down to see if he could rip it off, but Angelo's hands reached out and gripped both his and Cekrass' ankles. Shaggy felt the pressure on his ankle increase until there was a surge of pain and a loud pop. He heard Cekrass shout in pain as well. Angelo jerked his arms and sent both of them to the floor. Raising to his feet, Angelo adjusted his suit and glared down at the pair of them. He looked at Shaggy for a few seconds, but eventually turned his ire on Cekrass. The orc raised his foot and stomped down on the lizard man. Then he did it again. Shaggy was sure he heard something crack as he launched himself from the floor and grabbed Angelo's leg. Shaggy heard the orc TSK as he was dragged around the floor. Once he felt his ankle heal, Shaggy got to his knees and spun around to Angelo's back. Putting his shoulders into the orc's knees, Shaggy lifted with a grunt of effort. Angelo tried to jerk away, but as his feet left the ground, he couldn't get the leverage. Shaggy got Angelo up onto his shoulder and leaned back. Angelo delivered several strikes to Shaggy's head, but Shaggy ignored them and slammed the orc down onto the tiled floor. Oof! Shaggy heard the air leave the orc as he clambered to his feet. As he did, he checked on the nearby Cekrass. The big lizard was down for the count. A shout got his attention, and he looked toward the northern wall. Ephemera had her head poking out of a door. Roald and Silas were standing around her. She was waving at him. Shaggy nodded and gestured at the others. Blobby had gotten Chromia out of his body. She was getting to her feet, but still looked pretty rough. Rita was on her knees, clearly just returning to consciousness. Blobby looked the worse, his blue form was blackened in places, and Shaggy thought bits of the alien were falling off. Shaggy growled and moved to Cekrass. With a mighty heave, he slid Cekrass across the floor and toward Ephemera. Waving a hand at Rita and the others, he shouted, "Go. I'm the last one out. Get the stuff and I'll follow." Ephemera gave him the stink eye, but moved to help Rita and then Chromia stand. Shaggy turned to watch Angelo, but the orc was already on his feet again. Angelo watched as Chromia and the others rushed to the door. The orc smirked as he pulled another pair of glasses from his suit. "Where do you think you can run? Even if you get out on the streets, cogs machines are everywhere. Where are you going to go? Undertown? The Raks are down there as well, and we'll find you and make you pay for all of this." Shaggy snorted as he thought up a lie. "Bah. I got people down there. They'll hide us just fine." Angelo looked at him like he was an idiot. "You think anyone will protect you after the Raks put a bounty on you so high your own family would turn you in? The freaks ain't going to do the Raks any favors," Shaggy said, trying to sound convincing. Judging by the way Angelo smiled, Shaggy thought he had been successful. "Please," Angelo said, "we will march through that bunch of lab experiments just to show them what happens to people who cross us." Shaggy gave a mental sigh. "You are more than welcome to try, Angie. Now I'm going to run away from you now." The orc grunted angrily and moved, but a giant silver fist crashed down at him. Shaggy blinked, momentarily stunned. The fist had come from the hole in the wall and was attached to a giant robot that was peering inside the house. Shaggy backed up a few steps until he heard Roald's voice cheer. Shaggy spun and saw the teenager staring at the robot in wonder. Roald had something in his hand and was waving it around triumphantly. Shaggy couldn't keep the smile off his face. "Shit, kid. Nice work. Call off the bot and let me get at the body. That suit would be useful." Roald's face quickly became one of confusion, but it quickly changed to shock. I don't have control of the robot. I just summoned it." He waved the small device in his hands as if it answered all of Shaggy's questions. But he didn't get an opportunity to ask anything as another silver fist crashed into the house, aiming right at Shaggy. "Shit." Shaggy swore as he leapt backwards and away from the robot's second hand. Shaggy glared at Roald, but the young man just shrugged. He sighed and moved around the second fist as it withdrew from the house. At least they had gotten rid of. "Okay, kid. Time to go." Roald nodded as Shaggy approached him. Angelo roared angrily behind them. Shaggy ignored him as he ran through the north door and almost slammed into Blobby and the others. They were waiting just inside the doorway. Rita and Chromia were holding up an unconscious Cekrass, as Silas was carrying several bags. All the guns Blobby had collected were gone, but Shaggy didn't blame the poor, burnt alien. Ephemera shot him a grin as she pointed down the hallway. "Kitchen is this way." The sound of Roald's chair stopped Shaggy from saying anything. Once the boy was through the door, he looked around and smiled. "Almost home free." Shaggy grimaced as the sounds of destruction came from the foyer. Ignoring it, he waved everyone forward. He took Rita's side of Cekrass and signaled for her to help Silas. Once everyone was situated, Ephemera led the way down the hallway. The trip was a short one, but it was punctuated by the sounds of what had to be an epic fight. Once in the kitchen, Roald moved to a door on the western wall and pulled it open. Once it was open, the teen pulled himself from his chair and waved a hand at the stairs leading down. Everyone just glared at him until he got the message. He was going first. Footsteps in the hallway quickened everyone's steps, and Shaggy couldn't help but feel amazed Angelo had taken the giant robot by himself. Shaggy made sure he was the last one through the door, following a slow-moving Blobby. Quietly closing the door, he descended the stairs just as Roald was pulling a wine bottle from a rack. Once the bottle was free from its home, the wall shifted and behind it stood one of Roald's teleporters. Shaggy felt them all give a sigh of relief as Roald moved toward the terminal and started pressing buttons. He won't be able to follow us, right? Shaggy asked. Roald snorted. Please. I'm going to set it to self-destruct as soon as we're through. Shaggy nodded and felt the tension leave his shoulders. The portal whirred to life, and Silas was the first one through. No one stopped the old man as he nearly pushed everyone else away. Shaggy ushered Blobby through first, then Chromia and Cekrass. Next were Rita and then Ephemera, who gave Shaggy a jaunty salute before she stepped into the inky darkness. Shaggy glanced at Roald before he stepped up to the portal. Thinking better of it, Shaggy gripped the boy's shirt and tossed him through the inky blackness. Better he was the last one through the portal. He gave the terminal a quick check, making sure Roald had done what he had said. He found everything in order. There was even a helpful count of people to go before destruction. Shaggy stepped up to the black swirling portal and sighed. This has been a hell of a trip, he said as his vision went dark. Shaggy ducked under a random bit of piping as they walked through the darkness. It's a displacer, Roald said angrily from his position behind everyone else. The weird half-dirt, half-metal tunnels underneath the arena were pretty narrow, and they kept having to start and stop as the chubby teen got caught on piping or a bit of metal. He was currently maneuvering around a few bits of metal sticking out from the wall. Cekrass moved to help as Shaggy shook his head and asked his question again. Okay. How the hell did you build a displacer under the damn arena in the middle of Undertown? It wasn't exactly hard. No one uses these tunnels except for secret and clandestine deals. So when I was upgrading the security in some areas, I let a few minions loose and they did the work. That's fine, but are we sure that orc bastard won't be following us? Chromia asked angrily. Shaggy thought she was still salty from the ass-whooping the guy had handed all of them. He was too. Yes. The displacer was set to explode when the last of our group went through. So as soon as the Wolfman went through, it should have exploded. Everyone stopped in their tracks and turned to the boy. Even Blobby, who still looked slightly blackened and was moving slower than usual, stopped. Roald was trying to navigate his bulk around another odd pipe, but looked up when he felt everyone's gaze. Should have exploded? Ephemera asked angrily. Shaggy thought he was going to have to hold his new henchman back from attacking the poor kid. But she just stared daggers at the kid along with the rest of their group. Including Silas. Humph. Yes. Should have. I can't account for everything, so there is always a chance for error. But I feel there was a 98% chance the self-destruct would go off as predicted. Everyone gave a sigh as they turned back around and trudged along the tunnels. Ephemera and Chromia had assured Shaggy that there were some stairs into these tunnels somewhere. They just had to find them. Shaggy spoke up again from his position behind Rita. Well, even if he follows us to Undertown, I don't think they are going to be looking in the right place. Hopefully, I planted a small seed that the freaks were at least tangentially related to us. Do you think he bought it, boss? Rita asked. Shaggy shrugged and then realized she couldn't see it. Who can say? But if you had to choose between a low-rent outfit like us or one of the big boys like the freaks, who would you go with? Rita nodded in agreement and swiveled past a bit of metal sticking out from the wall. Shaggy thought he could smell fresh air ahead. The air in the tunnels had been stale and smelled heavily of dirt. The sound of Roald tripping again brought them all to a stop and Chromia exhaled angrily as Cekrass moved to help the boy again. Still, we should probably keep our heads down for a while, boss, Ephemera said. Of course. Shaggy agreed sarcastically. You know me, always willing to stay at home and guard the house. Shaggy felt everyone turn to stare at him and he knew why. He couldn't stand not doing something in Undertown. They had carved out a small piece of home for themselves, but they were still going to defend it. With the attack from Cog, they had even more gangs roaming about now. All trying to make a name for themselves. So now was the time to cement their own power base. He couldn't do that and hide from Raku scouts. He was ready to defend himself when Ephemera and Rita sighed. Yeah. You're going to keep being you, aren't ya, boss? He is, but we got his back. This pack thing helps a lot, so the others and I can help keep him out of trouble. Shaggy scratched the back of his head. I'm not a little kid. Rita snorted. Of course you're not, dear. Boss, we are going to want scouts roaming Undertown, or at least our turf. So we have some kind of early warning system when the Raks move. Ephemera explained. Shaggy saw a light coming from up ahead and felt Rita pick up her pace. Yeah. But that's your job, remember? You and Slink are our spymasters, so you can get on all that. I'm just the shock troop leader. Which means the crew and I throw ourselves at our toughest enemies and crush them. Ephemera grunted but said nothing as they got closer to the light. Shaggy could make out stairs, but they had to stop as Roald got caught on another pipe. Everyone groaned except Silas, who shouted. Carn flabbit boy. Go on a damn diet. Hey. Don't body shame me. If you are ashamed of your physique, then go on a diet. Roald jerked his body away from a pipe and sucked in his gut. I don't feel ashamed. I said you are shaming me. Silas grunted. I ain't shaming you. I'm insulting you. Everyone just lay off. Shaggy said. We are almost out, anyway. Once we are topside, we can go our separate ways and be done with all this. Chromia and Ephemera shot him looks, but he just winked at them. He had plans for both Silas and Roald, but he figured he'd let them stew a bit. Maybe let them wander Undertown alone for a bit. See how things were without protection, and then swoop in and grab them both up. But of course, Roald had to step all over his plans. Pfft. Like you are letting me go after I know so much about your operations. You are going to force me to work for you and build your whole crew stuff, just like my brother. Shaggy watched Rita head up the stairs and into the lights of the arena as he snorted. Bah. You know nothing except who we aren't with. Besides, how could I trust anything you make under duress? Your brother did, and you made a damn teleporter network. Displacer. Shaggy ignored him as he stood aside, waved Chromia up the stairs next. Maybe we would take Silas. We need shops around the bar and we did kind of wreck his. But that would depend on him. Silas' usually angry face turned contemplative as he rushed for the stairs. Well, we would have to talk percentages and, how protection would work. The old man trailed off as he ascended the stairs. Blobby went next as Shaggy continued to stare at Roald. The pink alien wagged his head back and forth like he was considering things. Before he went silent. Shaggy nodded but said nothing as well. The kid was a resource they needed, but as it stood, they really couldn't trust him. So, for now, he figured they could monitor him. Ephemera moved to the stairs and shot Shaggy a look before looking back at the alien teen. Shaggy nodded, hoping she would take his meaning. The pale woman nodded back and Shaggy hoped he hadn't just killed the kid via a series of nods. Cekrass ascended the stairs with his bags of ammo, and Shaggy couldn't keep the grin from his face. They went out for an ammo restock and found themselves in the house of one of the biggest crime bosses in the city. The same thing happened when he went looking for the damn handler for Scholar. He hoped whatever AI was running the game would give him a damn break. He almost missed the days of trouncing small gangs. Although he wasn't sure if that was actual days ago, time was real tricky when you lived underground. He was about to check his clock on the menus when Roald stopped next to him. The boy looked thoughtful and a little scared. You're really going to let me wander alone out there? Shaggy sighed. Yep. You're free to do whatever you want. Of course, if I hear you've been talking to the Raks, I'm going to have to send Ephemera after you. But for now, yeah, do what you want or what you can. Roald seemed to bristle at Shaggy's tone. What, you think I can't hack it by myself? Sure, kid. You can do whatever you set your mind to. He turned to go up the stairs as Roald huffed behind him. Shaggy momentarily thought about turning around to see if the boy was making it up the stairs. But he figured he would hear it if the boy stopped or fell. The stairs were steep, and they went on for a long while. Shaggy wondered at the decision to make an underground tunnel system beneath the arena, but he shook it off. He was sure the gangs were using it for something, and he didn't really care what. Soon, the smell of the food and sweat hit his nostrils, and new scent markers appeared in his vision again. He had turned so many gray that he almost didn't realize they were missing. Now, however, they were all over the place. Shaggy guessed that the arena was still in operation, even with all the robots probably still roaming around. He paused as he remembered Donnie was in charge of the arena. Shit! Shaggy shouted as he started taking the narrow stairs, 2 at a time. Roald shouted in alarm behind him, but Shaggy ignored him and ran up the stairs. It wasn't a long time until he was free of the stairwell and on the bottom floor of the arena. He looked around to find his crew standing by the exit. They all looked at him, clearly alarmed, as he came bursting from the stairs. Rita and Cekrass could probably feel his agitation. But Ephemera and Chromia just stared at him worriedly. Donnie's in charge of the arena, remember? Shaggy said. His crew seemed to get it at the same time. They all became cautious and stared at the few people around them. Shaggy even saw a few rat goons roaming around. Shaggy grit his teeth and moved toward a food stall. If they were going to fight their way out of here, he was going to need a top-up. The sound of heavy breathing brought everyone around toward the tunnel entrance. Roald was sweaty and his pink skin was a darker hue as he panted and stared at Shaggy angrily. Shaggy shrugged and continued toward a stall. After buying a few hot dogs and a pretzel, Shaggy felt more confident and turned to his crew. Rita had her sword out and was staring everyone down. Ephemera had phased, while Chromia had transformed. Cekrass was hovering near Silas and Roald, but the big guy was still carrying a lot of bags, and Blobby was pretty much out of commission. The black and blue orb of liquid even looked like it was going to deflate at any minute. Shaggy swallowed the rest of his food and told them the plan. Such as it was. Okay, Blobby, if you can, you just focus on getting home. Ignore us and get back to the bar, or at least get somewhere where you can recuperate or heal or whatever your race does. Blobby grew a tentacle and used it to pat Shaggy's shoulder. I just need a quiet and dark spot to slough off the dead skin. That's how you can think of it. I can do that back in the tunnel and then head back to the bar. Shaggy raised an eyebrow. Are you going to be alright by yourself? Blobby gave a burble that sounded like a snort, but said nothing. It moved its mass back toward the stairs and Shaggy watched it go until it was out of sight. Soon as it was gone, Shaggy turned back to the others and explained things. We are in enemy territory. Which isn't that much different from normal. But now we are on the turf of a guy I have pissed off a few times now. So his people are probably looking for me. So we need to be careful and if shit goes to hell, be ready to fight. Cekrass, your job is to get the ammo back home. We already lost the guns and this trip can't be for nothing. So if a fight breaks out, you just run. Forget us and get back to the bar. Understand? The giant lizard looked ready to argue, but a stern look from both Rita and Shaggy had the big guy nodding reluctantly. Shaggy turned again to address the others, but Ephemera phased into existence again, halting his speech. Rita is here. Shaggy glanced at the older woman and then back to his number 1 henchman. Rita was staring at Ephemera like she was an idiot, but the pale woman just groaned. I mean the other Rita. You know, the one you met at the diner? The one with the frizzy hair and the shitty attitude. Shaggy nodded as realization dawned on him. Scholars Rita? Ephemera just nodded as she continued. She's here leading a bunch of people outside. It looks like she is in charge of security. Chromia shook her head. Donnie would never let another group watch over his arena. His guys are the ones running security. Ephemera shrugged. Not anymore. So what's that mean? Rita asked. It means that this might not be that hard at all. Shaggy grinned and started walking toward the arena entrance. A boss? Ephemera started. But Shaggy ignored her and continued walking. If Scholar was now in charge of arena security, he might be able to talk their way out of here. Sure, he hadn't exactly gotten along with Rita and Scholar, but he had gotten Seymour down to Undertown. That had to count for something. He heard the others rushing to follow behind him just as he exited the arena and got under the large awning in front of the ticket takers. Sure enough, the frizzy-haired Rita was shouting orders at several suit-wearing gangsters. Shaggy waited until she spotted him as she was yelling at everyone around her. He waved placidly as her face went red. He could tell she was almost ready to order her people's attack. But a man beside her grabbed her arm. Shaggy recognized the man as Tolly, another of Scholar's goons and the one that had carried him into the Rak captain's office. Shaggy waved again as Rita angrily marched over. Chromia stepped beside Shaggy just as Rita got in his face. He could feel Cekrass and Rita and just behind him, flanking him like bodyguards. Oh, taking in the sights, checking out the deals, trying to pick up pretty girls. Rita's anger-red face went almost purple. The meeting was over 30 minutes ago. You are lucky the ceasefire is still in effect for this area or I would have your damn head. Shaggy grinned wolfishly. What would Scholar think about that? Rita sputtered, unable to form a coherent sentence as Tolly finally walked up beside her. He took one look at his friend and then glanced at Shaggy. He seemed to take all of their faces in and memorize them before he just nodded. Y'all should get out of here. Ceasefire ends in another 30 minutes. With all the new gangs out and about, you don't want to fight your way home. Shaggy shrugged and started walking away. I don't know. It would have been fun. But you are right. We got things to do and people to kill, so I will say goodbye. Do you know what happened to Tilani? Rita asked, still pissed off. Shaggy turned and felt his eyebrows climb up his forehead. What? Tilani is still missing. Rita explained. Rita smiled as she studied his face. He went missing just before his little coup failed. He lost people at every location he sent them to. Even the Quinnica were demanding his head. Scholar seems to think that this will settle your agreement with her. Shaggy grinned again. Well, she should know better than that. Our time together is far from through. I still have many stories to share. Who else would I share them with if not her? Rita had calmed down, but now her face was red again and she looked ready to start shouting. But Shaggy had said his piece and as a villain, you always wanted to make sure you had the last word. He gestured to his crew, and they always left the shadow of the awning and turned east. It was a fair distance back to the bar, but once they were clear of the arena, they should be as safe as they could be. As Shaggy picked up the pace, Ephemera phased into existence next to him, a surly look on her face. Geez, boss. Couldn't you wait until we were back a full hour before you pissed someone off? Shaggy chuckled and looked back. Everyone was slowly jogging after him, including Silas and Roald. The pink-skinned alien didn't seem happy about it, but he was doing his best. What can I say? Winding people up has always been my favorite pastime. Ephemera snorted. We need to get you home before you cause more trouble. Agreed. Although I think I am done causing mischief for the day. Bullshit. Shaggy cackled as he turned his jog into a full run. He heard a certain pink alien groan, but he ignored it and continued toward the bar. Tilani being out there somewhere was worrying, but for now, they could go home and enjoy their spoils. Undertown was slowly changing with the invasion of Cog's robots and the creation of new gangs. Things were going to get more and more interesting. Shaggy could feel his excitement travel to his new pack mates and he had to stop himself from howling as he ran back home. Then we all hauled ass here. Shaggy finished explaining as he sipped at some warm coffee. He was seated at a brand new table at their newly built and furnished bar. Vlad had spent a tidy sum on getting the walls and building built. But once everything had calmed down, Vlad and Ren had then gotten to making amenities for the bar. Tables, chairs, mugs, plates, utensils, and other things. All of it was made from the metal of Cog's machines too. Which was slightly off-putting for Shaggy, but it gave the bar a neat aesthetic. Apparently a few hours after Shaggy and the others left, the bar finally ran out of bullets. But the bladelings also were less frequent. There was still the odd gunshot in the distance, but mostly everything seemed to calm down. Undertown had survived, but it would be cleaning up the roaming packs of robots for a while. Some of their lackeys had even gone out to help mop things up in their neighborhood. He and Chromia were off talking about the details. Rita and Cekrass each found a room upstairs. After Shaggy had them furbished, his two pack mates fell asleep. Blobby had rolled into the bar, looking none the worse for wear. The blue alien was even carrying a few bladeling bodies within itself. Blobby said it felt bad that it had lost the guns. Shaggy just waved the lackey inside and told him to get checked out by the Needle Sisters. The sisters were still set up in the back of the bar, and while there had been some talk about getting them a shack nearby, for now, they seemed content. It wasn't too bad out there? Ren asked. Bladelings were abundant. But nothing we couldn't handle. Vlad sipped some liquid from a red-tinted wine glass and then said, "The ammo you guys got may have been late, but it's really going to help us out. But the big gets for us are the old man and the kid." Vlad shifted his gaze to Silas and then to Roald, who was seated in a corner. Although Shaggy was surprised to see the little bastard wasn't alone. There were a few lackeys surrounding him and chatting amicably. Shaggy figured the snot-nosed brat would have either told them off or angered them. As he was watching, though, he saw Ephemera phase into existence in the dark corner behind the boy. She raised a finger to her lips and nodded at the kid. Realization dawned on Shaggy. His number one was watching things. "They are going to be enormous assets for us," Ren agreed. Shaggy nodded, but said, "Silas is a little flaky, though. Also, the kid isn't with us just yet. I want him to get a feel for what it's like in Undertown when he doesn't have any protection." "So what? We're going to let him get his ass kicked a few times and then roll out the red carpet for him?" Ren asked, sounding annoyed. "No. Nothing like that. I just want him to realize that he needs protection. He can't go to the Raks 'cause they'll just turn him over. The freaks are about to have a bad time, if that Angelo character believed me about who my friends were down here. The Quinnica and UGB have been complete no-shows since we've been down here, and the only other sizable group we know about are the Brutes. The UGB would take him in," Vlad said, gulping down the rest of his drink. "They were the best equipped gang I have seen since we've been here. Full police riot gear and more than enough weapons to outfit them all. Although it was all antiquated compared to what their leader was wearing. I'm not an expert, but they were wearing civilian-grade power armor during that little meet and greet. Yeah, if they get their hands on the kid, that will not be a good time for Undertown." Ren agreed. "So what was up with that whole thing?" Shaggy asked. Vlad sighed and poured himself some more red liquid from a small bottle on the table. Shaggy ignored the iron scent of blood and maintained eye contact. That was more of a show of force than anything. The Big Four all stood on raised platforms in the center of the arena and informed everyone that things would not change. They were still in charge, and we all better remember that. Shaggy chuckled. "So after that went over poorly and they killed a few to make a point, then what happened?" "Well, after the culling. 'Cause that's what it was. The leaders of the Big Four fell into a discussion about various topics. Where the current borders of each territory were, what were the tithe each were collecting. Apparently some don't take credits. The freaks operate almost entirely on a barter system. They also brought up Tilani and our friends, the Brute clan." "How did those conversations go?" "Well, they had a lot to say about Tilani, I'll tell you that. The poor schmuck tired to stage a damn coup in everyone's territory. He even sent some guys at the Brutes. They got their asses kicked. Then, of course, there was the fact that you buried his ass, so no one can find him." Shaggy sat up in his chair. "You didn't tell them that, did you?" Vlad just gave him a withering look and continued. "So at the end of the day, the Raks are going to be doing some house cleaning. Scholar was put in charge of the dash." "Wait a second. If this was a meeting between the leaders who represented the Raks. Donnie Raks was above ground. Shaggy interrupted. The captains represented the Raks of Undertown, while the freaks had 3 so-called leaders. A lioness, an insectoid, and I think a werewolf. Shaggy raised an eyebrow, but stayed silent as Vlad continued. The Quinnica just sent one pale guy. He mostly stayed quiet during all the discussions. Then, of course, the UGB had the governor in all their splendor. So Tilani is out and the Raks are down a captain. Meanwhile, the Big Four are talking about our brutes. Vlad sat a little straighter as some random civilians walked into the bar. They had been getting a steady stream of customers since the robot invasion had calmed down. They had little in the way of supplies. But what they had, they were going through quickly. Shaggy was even thinking about making a supply run, but Petra had to order the stuff first. Yeah, the brutes were a decent topic of discussion. Apparently, more and more of them are coming down. The governor wanted to invite them into the Big Four as the new 5th member, but the freaks opposed the idea. They put it to a vote, but the Quinnica abstained and the Raks didn't want to vote without the input of their leader. But they said they would be open to either inclusion or elimination. Ren scratched his chin. So all of this took place in the arena? What? Did all the lower-tier gangs just sit quietly as the big boys talked? Well, after the UGB goons shot down the rowdiest gangs, yeah. We pretty much just watched the discussion. Although a few of us started networking when the big boys got into it. Vlad smiled. Networking? Of course, we little guys got to stick together. Shaggy grunted disbelievingly. Yeah, that will last. It'll last as long as it needs to. There are a few more player-run gangs down here, you know. Some are probably as big as us. But we kind of lucked out with our location. What do you mean? Well, we are technically on Quinnica turf. But with them holed up somewhere, they aren't policing things. Although they never really did. So we have free run of the place. But I will bet once their big shot elder comes into town we are going to get a visit. We'll have to pay a tithe or something. Ren crossed his massive arms across his chest. We going to pay it? Vlad wobbled his head. Maybe? We don't know how many of them there are and we don't know how we stock up combat-wise. Shaggy shook his head, remembering his fight against the Quinnica in a parking garage above ground. He and the professor had taken a bunch of the guys. But if they only had lackeys to work with, they would not cut it. They are like you, Vlad. Vampires. Shaggy held a hand to stall Vlad's indignant yell. I know, they aren't true vamps. But they sure as hell have the skill set. They are fast, tough and have sharp nails and teeth. I could take a bunch of the lower grade ones and that was before. I've leveled a bunch now. Us players would be fine, but our boys would get torn apart. Ren sat back in his custom-made metal chair and sighed. So we need to focus on training. I think we just need to focus on being a gang. Shaggy said. I mean, Ephemera ranked up to henchman and seemed to get a big ol' boost to her abilities. We need more of them while also getting our low-tier guys up to snuff. I think we can do that just through day-to-day operations. We can have Dave train the few that want it. But for the rest of us, it should be business as usual. We get out there, protect our turf, and get into some trouble. Vlad chuckled. That's more your area of expertise. Shaggy shrugged and began to talk, but was interrupted by Petra. Hey boss? Our order's in. We need someone for pickup and delivery. Should I send a few newbies? Shaggy sighed and checked the time. If his math was right, he should have a bit of time until his wife got home. Maybe enough for a supply run. I'll grab some people and take care of it, Petra. How long will I have to wait for the delivery? Petra shrugged, and this time Shaggy was sure her scales were growing more and more across her body. I don't know, boss. It depends on how quick the Quinnica feel about doing it. Vlad sat up and finished his wine glass of blood. I think I should see these false vampires up close for myself. Shaggy shrugged. Sure, Come along. What about you, Ren? The big, gray alien shook his head. I gotta log off. Stuff to do in the real. Shaggy nodded as he stood. Vlad joined him and the pair of them went off in search of some lackeys to take. Rita and Cekrass were out cold, but Sybil and Vic were around somewhere. Shaggy shivered as he remembered Tom was also loose somewhere in the bar. The thought of taking the talkative NPC on a long walk to and from the north wall was frightening. He was standing near their empty dance floor when Ephemera phased next to him. What's going down, boss? Just a supply run, Ephie. We need food. Don't you sleep? Eventually. But for now, I need people for a job. Speaking of which, don't spend all your time watching the little brat. Get some people to help you. Ephemera gave him a crooked grin. I've already found a few new guys with special talents to help me out. Why don't you take your own advice and grab some of the new bloods? You are keeping with that pack of yours too much. Their pack. It's what we do. Maybe. But don't ignore the rest of the crew in favor of your pack. It'll look bad. Shaggy sighed. Damn it. I'm running a gang here. Not trying to manage interpersonal relationships. Hey, image is everything in a gang. If the new bloods see you only interact with a close few, they are going to go elsewhere. Spread the love, boss. Shaggy grunted, but nodded begrudgingly. He still wanted to take Vic and Sybil, but he could grab a few unfamiliar faces. Seeing that he was taking her advice, Ephemera grinned and disappeared again. Shaggy spun in place until he saw a table full of people. Not know whether they were civilians or lackeys, he hesitated for a bit. Then he saw Arklot's familiar face among them, and he rushed forward. Hey! He shouted as he approached. Need a few for a supply run. Who's with me? The group around the table jumped, and he saw a few confused looks as the new bloods tried to place him. Apparently, he wasn't as well known in the gang as he would have liked. But Arklot jumped from his seat and finished his mug of beer. Shit yeah, boss. I'm down. How many we need? Shaggy rubbed his chin and thought. I'm taking 2 of my pack and you, so maybe 1 more. Vlad is also grabbing some fresh bloods for the run. Arklot's black eyebrows climbed up his red face. 2 of the bosses are going for a supply run? How much trouble are we expecting? Shaggy grinned. It's a whole new undertown out there. We need to make a statement, but we also need to collect some stuff for the bar. So find yourself a friend and meet me outside. Shaggy turned to leave and heard the table fall into a whispered conversation. That's one of the bosses? Why is a boss doing supply runs? Kinda short, isn't he? Shaggy grit his teeth at that last remark and stopped himself from turning around. He needed to find Sybil and Vic. His search didn't take him that long. Vic was asleep in an upstairs chair, gun at his side. Sybil took a little longer, but he found her coming out of a bedroom, her arm draped around a yellow alien woman. Both of their clothes were disheveled, and they were both grinning. Shaggy had to cough to get the small woman's attention, but she grinned at him unapologetically and kissed her paramour goodbye. Once they were all prepared and Sybil and Vic had gotten some more ammo, they left the bar. Outside, Arklot was waiting with a gray-skinned alien man. The alien sized Shaggy up, but said nothing. Shaggy felt both Vic and Sybil get a little annoyed at the gesture through the pack bond, but Shaggy sent them calming vibes. Vlad was also there with 3 other lackeys. All of them looked like rejects from a teen vampire holovid. Shaggy raised an eyebrow at his fellow player. What? Vlad asked. Shaggy just shook his head and said. Nothing. You want to take the lead here? Vlad gave him the stink eye, but addressed their small group. We are going on a quick jaunt to the north wall for supplies. Mostly food and drinks for the bar. The Quinnica manage the tunnel where we are getting those supplies, so no one is to make a move against them. Unless they move on us. On the way there, be on the lookout for any gangs and robots roaming around. We did a pretty decent job of clearing the gangs out before the invasion. But it's a whole new ballgame now. So keep your weapons handy and try not to separate. Everyone got that? There was a general murmur of assent. Although Shaggy was sure he heard one or two of Vlad's crowd say yes, master. He ignored it and turned to his crew for this quick run. Sybil and Vic had their guns low and ready, while Arklaw was still carrying his sword. The gray alien appeared to use his fist for weapons. Shaggy gave them all a curt nod, and they headed northward. Vlad fell in step with Shaggy and whispered. So you think we are going to find our way into a boss fight? Is that why you came? Shaggy asked, incredulous. No, but you have to admit. You're a trouble magnet. Shaggy ignored him and kept walking. He really hoped he wasn't headed into bigger trouble again. Once was enough, at least for this login period. He didn't need another run-in with the Quinnica either. Although he knew how to handle them now. But Shaggy was really hoping for a nice quiet run to get supplies. Attack LVL 15. Canines LVL 1. Claws LVL 15. Sharpness LVL 5 *. Serrated edge. Convex edge. Shaggy stared at his choices after evolving the sharpness on his claws. He had come out of the last few fights with 60 points in his werewolf tree. Thinking about the few times he could not cut through things, he upgraded his claw's sharpness and got 2 more choices. Choices that were apparently about the type of edge to his claws. Trouble was, he did not know what either of them meant. He was pretty sure a serrated edge knife had jagged, tooth-like protrusions along its surface. It made ripping and sawing easier, and with his strength, would probably do a lot of damage. But the convex edge was the one tripping him up. He had already used over 20 points getting his sharpness up to level 5, and he still wanted to look over his general evolution tree. He was about to bite the bullet and choose one when a gunshot drew him out of his menus. Looking around, he saw the cart and lackeys they were taking toward the north wall supply point. Vlad was up front, leading the way, but was now turned around, looking back. Shaggy followed his gaze and found Vic with a smoking rifle. The brown-haired man was standing there, smiling, as he checked his work. Shaggy checked his pack-mate's sight line and found a broken bladeling. The gray alien Arklaw had brought along, Tornk grunted. You keep shooting them and the rest of us won't have a chance to shine. Tornk rumbled in his deep voice. The stoneskin alien rumbled when he did everything from moving to whispering. Shaggy figured it was just an affectation of his species. Vic scanned the surroundings before he shouldered his rifle and smiled. Hey, not my fault that the rest of y'all use those archaic swords and such. God gave us the greatest invention, to destroy our enemies from afar. He patted his rifle affectionately. Shaggy chuckled dryly and looked at his 2 pack mates. Both Vic and Sybil were the 2 gun-toting members of his new pack. Sybil preferred to carry 2 pistols and spray and pray, while Vic was the sharpshooter. Vic got a chagrined look on his face as he caught Shaggy's eye. Not meaning you, boss. Shaggy waved him off. You ain't wrong, Vic. I could probably do with a long-range option at some point. But for now, my claws have kept me alive pretty well. No offense, boss. But I think that crazy rapid healing of yours has kept you alive longer than those claws. Sybil joked. Point taken. Their group started moving again as they all kept an eye out for more bladelings. Shaggy was about to go into his menus again when he saw Vlad give him a look. He and his vampire wannabes were toward the front of the cart, and they were pulling for now. They had agreed to swap for the trip back. The lackeys weren't pulling fast, but they were making good time. Shaggy jogged to the front of the short cart and walked next to his friend. That Tornk guy isn't wrong. How are the others supposed to get experience if your boy is sniping all the robots that get close? Shaggy shrugged. You want him to let a couple through so we can have a good dust-up? I could ask him to cool it. But, really, these guys have been fighting bladelings all day, right? They should have it down pat. Vlad rubbed his chin and nodded. Yeah, but any experience is good experience. Remember, they have levels like we do. Well, probably not exactly like we do, but you take my meaning. Fine. But let me get through my evolution stuff first. I've got to look up the difference between a serrated and convex edge for my claws. Vlad raised a black eyebrow. One is jagged, the other is a very sharp edge. Oh well, that simplifies the decision. Going with the convex? Yeah, serrated sounds fun, but the thought of sawing my arms through a body is a bit much. I just want my claws to be very sharp. Sharp enough to cut through anything. Well, your enhanced strength is going to help with a lot of that too, you know. Shaggy nodded, but he was already back in his menus, raising the convex edge option to level 1. Just as he predicted, the serrated option went red as he made his choice. That was another option that was now gone for him. He wondered if he could take the damn glaring red option off. But he left it for later. He still wanted to go through his general tree. Lycanthropy mutation tree. Attack LVL 15. Canines LVL 1. Claws LVL 15. Sharpness LVL 5. Serrated edge. Convex edge LVL 1 asterisk. Bone claws. Defense LVL 10. Tough bones LVL 3. Utility LVL 15. Partial transformation LVL 5. Limb transformation LVL 4. Regeneration LVL 25. Limb regen LVL 2. Pain suppression LVL 3. Points, 28. Thinking things over quickly, Shaggy dumped the rest of his points into regeneration. It had been a while since he had put anything into it and the ability was taking a lot of points. But it was pretty much his bread and butter. It is what had shaped his character in-game so far. So best to keep it topped up. With the full 28 points put into regeneration, Shaggy squeezed out a level from the ability. He was really going to have to focus up on it if he wanted the next evolution cell. Which wouldn't come until the ability was level 55. He grit his teeth and looked at his general tree. General tree. Toughness LVL 20. Thick skin LVL 15. Skin resistances LVL 5. Skin durability LVL 1. Reflexes LVL 20. Quick hands LVL 10. Manual dexterity LVL 2. Mind LVL 20. Enhanced focus LVL 3. Points, 120. Now this tree was easier for Shaggy to manage. It was taking longer to raise things, but it was a much simpler tree. At least, that's how Shaggy thought of it. He looked at his options before deciding that the first that needed to go up was his defense. Shaggy thought he was pretty good at getting out of the way, but for when he wasn't, a good defense was crucial. He immediately dumped points into it, watching as the level slowly ticked up. The point conversion was still a pain, but he had enough to get him a new evolution at least. Toughness LVL 25 asterisk. Thick skin LVL 15. Skin resistances LVL 5. Skin durability LVL 1. Dermal armor LVL 0 asterisk. Points, 54. Shaggy felt his eyebrows go up as he stared at his new option. He glanced down at his shredded and broken Eifert armor he had gotten from the professor. The armor was on its last legs, and he could really do for an upgrade. Looking at his point total, he winced as he hit the mental button. His points started decreasing, and he watched his new dermal armor ability until finally it leveled up. Dermal armor LVL 1 asterisk. Points, 32. Shaggy could feel himself get bulkier. His armor fit a little tighter and his arms bulged slightly as his skin got slightly darker. Whatever type of armor his skin had become, it also made him slightly more board-chested. It felt like he was wearing armor in a fantasy game. He twisted and moved as he tried to get used to his new armor. It would take a bit, but he figured it was worth it. He glanced back at the tree as Vic's gun went off again. General tree. Toughness LVL 25 asterisk. Thick skin LVL 15. Skin resistances LVL 5. Skin durability LVL1. Dermal armor LVL1*. Reflexes LVL20*. Quick hands LVL10*. Manual dexterity LVL2. Mind LVL20*. Enhanced focus LVL3*. Points 32. Shaggy thought about his decision for a few seconds before he split his points between mind and reflex. He already got a new ability, so he could try for another or make himself better overall. He went with the overall option. With 16 points in each, Shaggy thought they would equally go up in levels, but again, the game's point system did its nonsense. Reflexes LVL23*. Quick hands LVL10. Manual dexterity LVL2. Mind LVL21*. Enhanced focus LVL3. Shaggy just shook his head. The point system was just crazy. He really didn't want to think about it too much, but every time he put points into something, it made itself apparent. Sighing, he closed out his windows and slowed down till he was alongside Vic. His new bulkier frame took some getting used to, but the game system was helping him slightly. Probably making sure he didn't fall on his ass. He briefly thought about checking his skills, but he shook it off. He figured all that was better left to itself until he needed to make a choice. It was pretty immersion-breaking when you kept looking at the behind-the-scenes stuff going on with your character. The Evo trees were different as those were about how he would grow. But the skills? That stuff was all about the background stuff he could do. Hey, Vic, give it a rest for a bit. Gotta give Vlad's vamp something to nibble on. Vic smirked, but nodded as he slung his rifle back around his shoulder. Shaggy turned to Sybil, who had been listening, and she, too, holstered her pistols. Shaggy glanced at Arklot and Tornk. Arklot had his silver sword and looked apprehensive, but Tornk looked the happiest Shaggy had ever seen him. Tornk popped his knuckles and started looking around for any threats. Shaggy also waved a hand at Vlad, who nodded back at him. They each got their teams ready for close combat as they continued northward. Shaggy held back as the others engaged the few bladelings that came across them. Tornk was a machine, destroying things with his bare hands, while Arklot inexpertly swung his sword at the charging robots. Luckily, the robots were pretty easy to dispatch. Vlad's crowd fell upon the few errant robots with daggers and their fists. It took longer, but the whole crew seemed happier to be doing something as they all moved forward. Vlad and Shaggy stayed out of things, but kept an eye out for anything more dangerous. Vic chose to remain in the background, but Sybil charged in a few times, using the butts of her pistols as cudgels. Between them, they probably made a good dent in the local robot population. Vlad and Shaggy figured it counted as their good deed for the day. But soon they noticed a distinct lack of robots in the surrounding area. Shaggy had Vic stop helping with the cart and get back to Overwatch. He didn't think they needed it, but he figured it was better safe than sorry. Vlad had said it was because they were getting closer to the Quinnica's tunnel, but Shaggy wasn't too sure. The space vamps hadn't been too keen on taking care of their territory so far. But maybe they valued their tunnel to the surface more than the local population. Shaggy could see that. It was another few minutes of silent walking before unfamiliar sounds broke through the air. Shaggy was surprised at the sounds of an obvious crowd of people coming from ahead of him. The small collection of metal huts blocked his view, but the obvious sounds of people arguing and talking couldn't be mistaken. The cavern wall arched over their heads, and Shaggy could just make out the top of a large, dark tunnel. Their group broke through the collection of houses and into a small dirt clearing. People were milling about as others collected their goods from the back of trucks. Nearby, people offered their services as carriers, while others sold cheaply made carts, much like the one they were using. Even more people were shouting at the pale-skinned Quinnica, who were standing guard near the various kinds of trucks arranged around the front of the large tunnel entrance. Vlad immediately flitted forward to get a sense of the situation. Shaggy had the rest of the crew pull up to a spot and watch the surrounding crowd. Shaggy caught several aliens and mutants watching them and making note of their empty cart. He wasn't sure if they were going to be a problem, but he thought it best to mark their various scents on the air. They only had to wait a short while before Vlad was back and ushering them toward the front of the mass of people. Shaggy raised an eyebrow in question as they pushed and shoved their way forward. These people are demanding supplies to help rebuild the local area. The robots did a number on things, and people want to rebuild. But the Quinnica weren't having it. You gotta go through the proper channels if you want materials. Sounds like a powder keg, Shaggy said as he elbowed past a shouting alien. Vlad nodded. Yeah, which is why we are going to grab our shit and go. We don't need this headache. You're aware some people are going to make it our headache, right? The way we are armed will deter a few, but yeah. Getting back is going to be fun, Vlad said, smiling widely. Shaggy smiled as they finally got to the front of the mass of people. A Quinnica was standing there with a clipboard and looked ready to ask them a question. But Vlad just waved at him and they were waved forward. The Quinnica guard went back to staring blankly at the crowd as they yelled at him. Shaggy looked around at the few other Quinnica standing in a line in front of the crowd. They were obviously ready to defend their trucks and shipments. But none of them were truly armed. Thinking back to when he tussled with them, Shaggy didn't think they needed to be. Vlad led them toward the back of an old army-style covered truck and the few Quinnica standing near the back of it. Vlad's crew adjusted their cart so they could toss their shipment into the back of the wooden push cart. Shaggy sighed and looked at the truck the Quinnica were using. Hey! He shouted at one of the pale space vamps. How much to just take the truck? We could return it in a few hours after we drop off our stuff. The four Quinnica turned as one toward him and stared. Shaggy stared back, waiting for an answer, but one never came. Soon the Quinnica chose to ignore him and went back to staring at the crowd blankly. Shaggy harumphed in anger and was about to ask again when he decided against it. They didn't need the trouble. Especially with the shit time they were going to have getting out of there. Once they had finished loading and strapping down the few crates Mr. Blue and Petra had ordered, Shaggy and Torque spun the cart around as Sybil and Vic got behind it to push. Vlad and his wannabe vamps took up defensive positions around the cart and they marched forward. Unfortunately, the crowd remained in their way. Through? Shaggy asked Vlad. Through. Shaggy turned to Torque and grinned. Hope you can keep up. Torque snorted. How fast can you move with those short legs? Shaggy grunted angrily and rushed forward, using the cart's front handle to drag it through the dirt. People started shouting louder and Shaggy was sure he even heard a few screams. But he ignored it as he charged forward. He smiled as he noticed Torque slip a few times as he tried to match pace with Shaggy. The stone alien was strong but not very light on his feet, apparently. Shaggy's smile was wiped from his face as a knife swung out from the crowd and jammed itself into his chest. He felt the knife get turned aside by his new dermal armor and, with a thought, he shifted his hand and flicked his claws at the arm holding the knife. A loud scream went up from the crowd and the knife's owner went down, clutching at his severed arm. Shaggy gave the crowd a glare and went back to pushing the cart. A few gave them a wide berth, but Vlad and his crew still had to push against the crowd until they finally broke away and backed down the way they had come. Shaggy glanced around and noticed that Sybil and Vic were no longer pushing the cart. The pair had their guns out and were watching their surroundings. Shaggy was about to say something when he realized he was actually fine pulling the cart. Torque was helping, but he felt he could take the thing the entire way home. Even with it loaded as much as it was. Getting back is going to be fun, Vlad said from nearby. Shaggy looked at the scent trails he had marked from the crowd. A few were moving about behind them as they moved. Shaggy nodded at his vampire friend and pushed the cart a little harder. Yep, we are going to have a few roadblocks in our path. But I'm sure we can handle it. Vlad nodded as they all jogged along with the cart. Torque swearing under his breath at the pace Shaggy was moving. They were attacked 4 separate times on the way back to the bar. Shaggy had tagged a lot of suspicious-looking people's scents, but he couldn't tag everyone. Some tried to stop them like old highway robbers, standing in the road and acting menacing. Others just jumped from nearby roofs and tried to take them by surprise. Vic and Sybil's guns, combined with Tornk and the others in melee range, were more than enough to repel the attackers. Vlad and Shaggy spent most of the journey back making plans and discussing various bits of the game they had enjoyed. Even some they hadn't. They also talked about how to expand and train up their burgeoning criminal empire. They had 4 players and almost 100 lackeys running about the place. Their little outfit had really grown fast. But with that many thugs in one place, they were going to need a project. Something to keep the grunts occupied while they focused on the big stuff. "We have to set up patrols," Vlad explained. "Our grunts need to be out protecting our turf and establishing the boundaries of our area." Shaggy nodded. "Okay, but what about weapons? We are not all kitted out. Do we have the capital to arm ourselves, or are we sending our people out with just their fists?" "Hey, it's worked so far. These blade things changed the game somewhat, but even they are susceptible to knives and cudgels. So we send them out and see what happens. They can also do protection collections for us." Shaggy sighed as, nearby, Vic shot a teal-skinned alien wielding an electric knife. "Yeah, I suppose. It would also give us time to focus on our own personal teams and projects. I know the pack and I could do with a few outings under our belts. The bond is not as overpowering as it first was, but we could still use the practice." Tornk ripped a tentacle-like arm off another attacker as Vlad said. "Exactly. Also, we both need the points to find our make vampire/werewolf ability. If we even have them." "Bah. I know I have one. You just need to see if you do." Shaggy dodged a wild haymaker from a skinny purple alien. He backhanded the young man back toward his crew and grunted at Vlad's suggestion. It wasn't as if he didn't want to create a pack of werewolves, but points were hard-won and weirdly spent in the system. He was already pretty tough, but spending points on making werewolves would be points he couldn't place elsewhere. Something must have showed on Shaggy's face, because Vlad snorted. "It's worth the point cost. Maybe not personally, but it will help the group immensely." Vlad stopped talking and dodged a sword swipe from a human woman. He dipped in and ripped her throat out with his fangs. Blood dripped down his face as he glanced around questioningly. Shaggy did as well. That was 2 thugs that had made it to them. They were standing next to the cart, surrounded by their crew. It should have been pretty difficult to attack them. Looking around, Shaggy saw that Vic and Sybil were engaged in melee combat. Arklot was on the ground with Tornk over him, doing his best to fight back their attackers. Shaggy had to raise an eyebrow because it looked like they were being attacked by the Quinnica. They were all pale-skinned kids that moved and seemed stronger than normal people. Shaggy also noticed that Vlad's vamps were all down. Dead or unconscious, he didn't know. "I got it." Vlad sighed as he blurred forward at the nearest pale-skinned thug. Shaggy watched as Vlad's mist-like body slammed into the grunt and lifted him into the air. Vlad's own pale hand reached out of the mist and twisted the poor guy's head clean off. Then he was gone, onto the next Quinnica. He charged at Tornk's attackers and ripped into them with his black nails, easily cutting into their flesh. They would try to back away, but Vlad was too fast. He easily caught them and finished them. He even bit one, which made Shaggy wonder what the Quinnica parasite in their bodies would do to another vamp biting its host. With Vlad's help, the crew made quick work of the Quinnica. Vlad even left one alive to question as Shaggy went around and checked on their crew. A few of Vlad's thugs were dead, but it appeared that all of Shaggy's crew made it through. Arklot was just knocked out. As they moved the red alien into the cart, Shaggy wondered why the pack bond hadn't told him his pack mates were in trouble. But it had. The bond was alive with information, letting him know his pack was fighting. But it didn't go deeper than that. It wasn't a danger sense for his pack apparently, it just let him know they were fighting and their general emotional state. Which in the middle of a fight was pretty all over the place. No. Please. We were just following orders. Please do ARGGH. Shaggy glanced over at Vlad and saw the pale player with his lips attached to the Quinnica's throat. He could see his friend gulp the other guy's blood until the NPC was empty. Throwing the Quinnica grunt into the dirt, Vlad turned and marched back to Shaggy, looking highly annoyed. Well, that's a new problem. Orders? Yeah, apparently the Quinnica don't like us operating in what is supposed to be their territory. So they've sent out their yun to deal with us. Shaggy grimaced. Well, that's a new wrinkle. Vlad gave a sardonic laugh. Huh. Yeah, now we got to be on the lookout for these bastards. I also don't think our boys are up to taking on fully enhanced aliens like the Quinnica. Shaggy said quietly. Vlad nodded. Agreed. We are really going to have to put them through some training. But for now, all we can do is defend our turf as best we can. Shaggy nodded as they moved back to the cart. Vlad looked at his wannabe vampire crew and saw that they had lost 2 members. He sighed as he ordered for everyone to loot quickly so they could be on their way. The vampire player used his black cloak to wipe the red blood off his mouth and chin. Bastards didn't even taste good. About that. Did you get any messages when you were drinking from them? Like maybe you were infested with that parasite thing inside them? Vlad blinked owlishly at Shaggy for a few seconds before he shook his head. No, I don't think so. Most of the young Quinnica die when their host does. It takes a really old parasite to last outside the body. Shaggy nodded. Vlad would know. The player had spent hours trying to find the right vampire-type alien he wanted to play. Eventually, he had to go with a mutation instead of being an alien. But the choice worked out for Vlad. He could be the type of vampire he wanted. Long flowing cape, top hat, and all. Once the looting was done, Shaggy took hold of the cart's front handle and pushed. Thankfully, the rest of their journey to the bar was peaceful, and they made good time with Shaggy pulling the whole way. A few bladelings came their way, but Vic's rifle put them down and Vlad even had them load some of the scrap into the cart. Everything was useful with the console in their new lair. However, once they approached the square outside the bar, they all could hear shouting. Vlad and Shaggy glanced at each other before they bolted toward the noise. Shaggy, still pulling the cart along. The rest of their crew matched pace, and soon they all burst into the dirt clearing. Standing in front of the bar was a group of dark-clad individuals, all shouting at the people standing in front of the door's entrance. Shaggy could see a few guns sticking out of the bar's front windows, and he was sure they had shown up just in time. The creaking of the cart caught the attention of everyone as Shaggy and Vlad stopped in front of the cloaked group. Shaggy was sure he could see pale skin peeking out from beneath the hooded figures' cloaks. Quinnica, he sighed, taking in all 8 of the figures. Vlad growled uncharacteristically. What do you want with our property? A cloaked figure stepped forward, and a soft accented voice wafted over to them. Your property? Boy, you own nothing here. Everything in this area belongs to the Quinnica. Shaggy set down the cart's handle and stretched his arms out. More out of habit than actual soreness. The move caught the attention of the group of Quinnica, and they all turned as one to regard him. But Vlad wasn't done talking. The Quinnica all turned again, back toward Vlad. You will pay a tithe to keep your building? Also, anything you earn, 10% will go to your minders in this area. Failure to cooperate will result in your extermination. Is that your final answer? Vlad just scoffed as his fangs and nails grew out. The leader of the Quinnica quirked an eyebrow, but said nothing and waved at their men. Shaggy was surprised to see the Quinnica settle down and back away. Heading westward out of the square. Shaggy looked at Vlad, but the vampire waved him off. It appeared the Quinnica were leaving, and the situation was quickly de-escalating. But as the first of their group was exiting the square, a cloaked figure at the end suddenly spun and dashed toward Vlad. The Quinnica moved fast. Shaggy enhanced focus barely let him keep up with the figure as it bolted through the air. But Vlad was far faster. In a puff of black smoke, Vlad disappeared and reappeared right in front of the charging Quinnica, his left arm outstretched. There was a grunt and the cloaked Quinnica's head glanced down at Vlad's arm, piercing their chest. With a jerk of his arm, Vlad ripped his arm out of the Quinnica's side and let them drop to the ground. The Quinnica had all turned to watch the exchange and Shaggy could see the shocked expression on the leader's face. Either that hadn't been part of the plan or Vlad's strength surprised them. Either way, the pale leader fixed their expression and glared at Vlad. The vampire player shrugged as he flicked the blood off his arm. The Quinnica leader continued to glare as they and their cohorts slowly exited the square. Shaggy grunted as he crossed his arms. I give it an 8 out of 10. Presentation was good, but you missed an opportunity to really freak them out. Vlad spun on his heel and addressed Shaggy. Punching my arm through a guy's chest wasn't enough? Bah. I would have ripped his heart out and bit into it. That would have really got to them. Bleg. Dude. What? You literally drink blood. The game mechanics make it taste good. I don't want to test whether the system will do the same for some guy's heart. Shaggy waved Vlad off and moved back to the cart. It appeared that for now, the situation was handled. But they were going to have to set up a watch of around the bar and a player was going to have to play watchdog for a bit as well. They were going to be on a constant war footing, apparently. They just got the Raks situation handled and now the Quinnica were coming back out of the woodwork. Once Shaggy got the cart in front of the bar, several lackeys moved to secure everything. Petra was in the lead, immediately doing inventory and checking that they had received everything. As he watched, Shaggy suddenly swore, surprising everyone. Shit. What? Vlad asked. The Quinnica run our supply tunnel. Shaggy said simply. Vlad pursed his lips, but said nothing. Petra, who was still marking things off, jumped in the conversation. Yeah, this is going to be a problem. We are going to have to find a new supplier. Although I suppose there is a chance the Quinnica won't immediately cut us off. Maybe we can get in one last big order? Shaggy grimaced, not looking forward to going back out there right now. Vlad shook his head at Petra. No. We need to create our own supply chain. Can we have people run topside and back with large packs or something? Petra grimaced. Yes, but that's not a solution. That's a stopgap at best. I agree, but for now let's do it. We can work on getting our own tunnel to the surface or making new arrangements as we go. Shaggy said. Petra nodded as she followed the supplies inside. A load of lackeys and civilians right behind her. Shaggy glanced at Vlad's pensive face and could guess what the vampire was worried about. Supplying their lair was going to be a pain in the dick unless they had trucks and a tunnel to the surface. But they couldn't even hold a tunnel with the group they had. So for now, they were going to be forced to make mini-runs to the surface to grab stuff. Shaggy briefly wondered if the Brute clan had a tunnel to the surface. He was about to ask Vlad when a messaging window popped into his vision. He grumbled as he read through the message. His sour look turning into one of happiness. Hey, guess what just arrived early and with a we're sorry gift card. No way. Yes way. My pod is here. Would you mind? I also have to pull my character info from your pod anyway. I'll be right out. Let me just finish some stuff. Okay. Love you. This is going to so awesome. Love you too. See you soon. Shaggy closed the window and turned his grinning face to his vampire friend. Vlad took a step back at Shaggy's cheery face. But Shaggy was undeterred as he rushed forward and grabbed Vlad by his shoulders. My wife is coming. Vlad snickered as he said. Good for you. Did you have anything to do with it? Vlad laughed at his own joke. He. That's all well and good, but is she going to be okay with the whole villain thing? Pfft. It was her idea that we roll villains for this game. Trust me, dude. This is going to be sweet. I have to log though. so I'll talk to you later. Okay. You have fun setting up a pod and going through all the data transfer nonsense. I hear that shit can be a pain. Shaggy's finger was already on the logout button before Vlad had finished speaking. He was excited to start playing games with his wife again. That's how they had met in the first place and remained a passion they shared throughout their marriage. He cycled through all his wife's other characters, trying to guess what she had come up with this time. He felt his feet leave the ground before he was enveloped in inky blackness as he logged out. It took longer than Shaggy wanted to get the second pod set up. So when he logged back in the game, it was a full day later in the real world. Which meant that 3 days had passed in the game. Shaggy prepared himself to log into pure pandemonium, but he was pleasantly surprised. Not only was the bar still standing, but the place was pretty busy, too. The bar was standing room only as Shaggy walked in. The large dance floor and stage had people milling around, drinking and talking. A few were even using the empty band stage as a table. As Shaggy looked around, he could see several lackeys interspersed with the crowd. Some were happily mingling, while others had angry looks on their faces as they scanned the mass of people. He couldn't find Vlad or the others, though, so he moved to the bar, hoping to find Mr. Blue or Petra. The counter was the most densely packed area of the bar, and Shaggy had to shoulder his way past a few stubborn patrons. But eventually he made it and stopped short at what he saw. A large minotaur was behind the bar, taking drink and food orders. Shaggy's grin fell as he thought they had lost the bar to another group. But then the door to the kitchen opened and Mr. Blue stepped out. The blue-skinned alien caught Shaggy's eye and nodded placidly. Shaggy walked over and caught the bar owner by the shoulder. What the hell has been going on? Mr. Blue adjusted the dark green vest he was wearing before responding. We had been operating at full capacity since you and the others went off. Miss Ephemera even brought in some more help for the kitchen and bar. We have had a few attacks from the Quinnica and surrounding robots, but nothing too dangerous. Mr. Dave and Slink arrived a short while ago. Dave is off exercising with some of the men and I believe Slink is downstairs. Shaggy froze for a few seconds before he grinned up at the taller alien. He took a few steps closer, waiting to see if the guards did anything to him. But they just glared at him. Obviously, they were hoping they could scare him off with a mean look and harsh language. Once Shaggy was close enough to count the stains on the yellow asshole's t-shirt, he asked. So neither of you know who I am? The yellow alien glanced at his partner before he glared back at Shaggy. Before the lackey could say anything though, Shaggy had reached up and gripped the man by the neck. Holding back as much as possible so he didn't kill the idiot, Shaggy pushed through the door. He dragged the lackey into the next room, followed closely by his fellow guard. She had her hand at her waist and was obviously going for a gun, but Shaggy ignored her as he wrenched the door guard around and presented him to the few people in the stone room. Slink and Ephemera were standing around a large computer table, both staring at him in shock and confusion. More lackeys were in the room and Shaggy was sure he saw part of his pack seated on a nearby couch. The room was pretty sparse, but it looked like they were slowly getting things built up. With couches, TVs, a coffee table, it had the making of a nice rec room for everyone. Several lackeys went for their weapons, but others stopped them as Rita stepped forward and grinned. Sybil and Tom were with her and they all looked to be relaxing in the room. Shit, boss. You can't blame the guy. Not a lot of the new crew have seen you yet. Shaggy grunted and dropped the door guard. He saw several people in the room mouth the word boss, so he spun in a circle and addressed as many people as possible. A small sea of shocked faces stared back at him, so Shaggy focused on shifting his hands into claws and waved them about. I said, "Are we clear?" Yes. A chorus of voices answered him and Shaggy moved to join Slink and Ephemera at the fancy table they were looking down at. The sounds of shuffling feet behind him told him that the door guards were either returning to their posts or running for the hills. Rita and the others of his pack joined him as he stared down at the screen built into the large rectangular table. It was obviously some kind of tiny holographic map as it showed the surrounding areas of the bar and several nearby locations. It looked like it went on for a few blocks before it got fuzzy and indistinct. Shaggy glanced up at Slink and raised an eyebrow. The young teen shook the shock from his face and coughed awkwardly. Sorry. This is our war table. Vlad bought it the other day so we could collate our scouts' information. It helps us keep track of enemy movements and what the Quinnica are up to. But Shaggy stared at the various blue buildings on the map. In a few places, the buildings were incomplete. There were a few red dots that probably showed enemy movement on the map, too. But they shifted wildly between blocks. There also appeared to be an enormous collection of red spots out west. Shaggy kept looking at Slink, urging the boy to finish his thought. Our guys suck at scouting. I mean, really. This table operates on the reports we feed into it. So the more detailed the reports, the better our information will be. But our scouts hate paperwork. Shaggy sucked in a breath through his teeth. We all hate paperwork. But we are talking about shit that can keep us in the game. The more detailed those reports are, the better we can fight off the Quinnica and defend our turf. Who is in charge of the scouts? Ephemera coughed into her hand before she silently raised it. Shaggy felt a confused look come onto his face, and he couldn't help but ask. Why? You're supposed to be our lead spy. Spying and scouting are not the same. I figured I could do both, boss. Yeah, no. We have to find someone else to get our scouts up to snuff. No offense, Ephemera, but I want you focused on spying on our enemies. Particularly the Quinnica. They are the latest group we've pissed off and we are operating in their backyard. So that's where our next headache is going to come from. Gotcha, boss. How have we already pissed off another of the big four? Slink whined. Shaggy shrugged. Least it wasn't me this time. Vlad's not a fan of the fake space vamps. So I guess he's a little short with them. But when they march into our turf and demand a tithe, well, that would set anyone off. Maybe. But what do we do then? I have been rotating scouting teams, trying to find a good batch of people to make permanent scouts. But it's like correcting homework. Some of these guys can barely freaking spell. Well, that's a disconcerting and a little hilarious. Shaggy chuckled. Just keep doing that until you find a group of people who can do the job the best. Slink nodded and turned his head toward the table again. He brought up a window and started looking over a large block of text. Shaggy studied the kid's face before asking. You all right with doing that, kid? I know most people don't want to play a game and do paperwork. Slink snorted and swiped his finger over the hovering window. The block of text moved up, and he kept reading. I'm fine. This stuff is simple. You and the others can go out there and fight with a bunch of alien vampires. I'll hold down the fort. We also need to organize our people a little better. So I can work on that. Shaggy put up his hands and started backing away. As long as you're having fun. I'm going to take my pack out and about. We need to run the yard a little. Do you have somewhere you want us? Slink closed the window in front of his eyes and looked over the table. We need more information on the Quinnica. They are on our western side and slightly to the north. But they have guys roaming everywhere. I would say that you head north and then curve west. Might be safer than heading straight for them. Pfft. Where's the fun in that? Shaggy asked, walking over to his pack mates. Although in truth, Shaggy had no real motivation to run straight at the pack of pale space vamps. He was waving at Rita when Slink asked another question from behind him. Vlad said your wife was coming to play with us? Shaggy nodded as he turned around. Yeah, we got her pod all set up, but it took all evening. So she'll be here after work. Although I may have to go topside to get her. Slink smiled. Cool. What kind of powers does she have? I do not know. Shaggy shrugged. We promised not to tell each other what we rolled until we met in game. I hope it's something awesome. Trust me, kid. Knowing my wife, it will be. With that, Shaggy led Tom, Rita, and Sybil out of the underground room. As they passed the door guards, neither of them would look at Shaggy, and he had to stifle a laugh at their stiff posture. His pack walked out onto the bar's main floor and then spread out to find Vic and Cekrass. The big lizard was the easiest to find, as he was at least a foot taller than most anyone in the bar. Sybil tracked Vic down to a room on the second floor. Shaggy felt a little bad about waking the man up, but Sybil said he was just polishing his rifle. Which Shaggy hoped wasn't a euphemism. With his whole pack gathered, Shaggy headed for the door. He could tell that their group was drawing a lot of eyes, but he ignored them. Once out the door and away from the tumult of people, Shaggy took a deep breath and looked around. Undertown was still dark and dreary, with the occasional gunshot going off in the distance. There was still the scent of smoke in the air and sounds of people shouting. Scent trails crisscrossed in his vision, and he tried to look into them, to see if he could discern anything about their owners. But beyond the normal coloration tags, nothing changed. "Boss?" Rita asked. Shaggy hadn't realized he had closed his eyes. As he opened them, he looked at his small pack of lackeys. Rita, Sybil, and Vic were looking at him questioningly, while Cekrass was looking around for threats. Tom was talking the ears off some people standing just outside the bar. They looked like they were about to punch the skinny chatterbox. Shaggy grinned. "Okay, people. We are going north and then curving westward. We are hunting for space vamps. So be on your toes and watch out for their claws and teeth. Let's go." Shaggy jogged northward, and he felt the others following him. Rita spoke up as they all started moving. "I thought you said doing it this way wouldn't be fun. ****, sometimes we can't just do what's fun. We have to be smart about this." Shaggy coughed. "Do the Quinnica bleed?" Sybil asked as she moved closer to Shaggy's side. Shaggy saw the short woman tap her pistols. "Pistols work, but you are going to need to use a lot of bullets. They are tough, but have the same weak points as everybody. Heart, head, eyes, nuts. So, same vulnerable spots, but we might need more shots to take one down." Vic asked from behind Shaggy. "Yep. Rita might have an easier time with her sword, but they are also fast. Not as fast as Vlad, but still pretty quick. Just be ready." Shaggy explained. "That's why we're going north first, isn't it?" Rita asked. "You want us to learn how to fight them in smaller groups first?" Shaggy nodded. "Yeah, but I also think we need to figure out this bond. I have a basic understanding of how it works, but I think we need to field test it." "Ha ha ha. It strengthens me and I can feel the others. What else do I need to know?" Tom called happily as they moved. The surrounding huts grew closer together and Shaggy had to squeeze through a few gaps. They kept up the discussion on the pack bond as they ran. Shaggy explained that while he didn't get a boost from the bond, he could feel them slightly over it. Meanwhile, from his pack mate's perspective, they could feel his mood as well, but they also felt completely energized. Rita described it as being on 4 cups of coffee all the time, and the others kind of agreed. Shaggy watched the scent trails in the air and kept an eye out for the odd robot. He was sure he could hear clanking in the distance as the robots fought or moved in the neighborhood. There were also a few civilians moving along the dirt roads. Some looked familiar to Shaggy, while others didn't. A few of the unfamiliar ones stared at his group with either fear or anger. Shaggy ignored them and turned off the scent trails of the various civilians he met. Hopefully, if he went out enough, he would eliminate all the non-combatants in the neighborhoods surrounding the bar from his scent trails. He was ticking off blue and yellow scent trails from his vision when a brand new scent appeared from the north. Shaggy blinked and stared at the odd-colored scent markers. Normally, a scent trail would be a solid color denoting the individual he could smell, but this new one was both blue and yellow. The yellow coloring was far more pronounced than the blue, but Shaggy felt the blue was seeping into the yellow even as he watched. He stopped their jog through the neighborhood and watched the scent trails. There were 4 of them moving eastward and Shaggy was sure they were the space vamps. But the odd mix of scents worried him. The normal Quinnica at the supply tunnel had fully blue scent markers showing that they were fully alien. But now with the yellow coloring Shaggy had thought meant mutant mixed in, it was an interesting smell. Shaggy took a large whiff of the scent trail and focused. Sweat, body odor, cloth, dirt all wafted into his nostrils and Shaggy took a second to parse everything. There was another smell behind everything else, but he couldn't identify it. It wasn't the fear he had smelled at the start of the robot invasion. But it had a similar nebulous quality to it. Shaggy was rubbing his chin in thought when Rita smacked him on the side. "Talk to us, boss. We can all feel your confusion, and it's annoying as hell." Shaggy grunted. "Ugh, sorry. I'm just trying to parse these scents coming from up ahead. We got 4 creatures heading east. I don't know what they are. My head says Quinnica, but the smells differ from what I've smelled before." Vic grabbed his rifle from its shoulder strap and held it ready. "Well, there's an easy way to find out." The others nodded in agreement and Shaggy pointed to where the scent was moving. "We'll hit them at a run. Shock and awe, people. If we identify them as Quinnica, lay into them. If they aren't, well, they'll get a surprise and maybe robbed." The others chuckled as Shaggy took off at a full run. He followed the mix of scents and dashed between the metal shacks of the neighborhood. He could see the scent growing larger as he followed them, and eventually the scent trail of yellow and blue separated into 4 different mixed scent trails. It looked like they were traveling in a tight square, and as Shaggy burst forth from between a few houses, he caught sight of several pale men in black clothes. Which was enough for Shaggy as he pounced. "Surprise! You space suckers!" Shaggy felt his claws hit flesh and then, after a small tug, the smell of blood filled the air. However, the usually accompanying scream of pain was replaced with a grunt of annoyance followed by his opponent jamming his pale hand forward like a spear. Shaggy could see the black fingernails of the Quinnica's hand glinting in the low light of Undertown. He backpedaled out of the way and backed off enough to grin at his opponent. The male alien was holding his side as blood flooded out of his stomach. Shaggy could see the Quinnica's pale flesh slowly knitting back together. He gave a grunt and rushed back in as gunshots and shouts resounded in the street. They had hit the Quinnica patrol hard and fast. But the alien's enhanced speed had more than made up for any surprise the ambush had afforded Shaggy's pack. Shaggy had clipped one and moved on to the next, only for the first one he had attacked to heal and then come at him. While the healing wasn't anywhere near his own, Shaggy had a brief idea of what fighting him must be like for NPCs. It was annoying. A gunshot went off over his shoulder and the Quinnica's head snapped back harshly. Not taking any chances, Shaggy burst forth and sliced his claws through the pale man's neck. He felt the flesh give and the rough tug of bone before a thud of the alien's head hitting the dirt. Shaggy felt a tug on his consciousness and looked to his left in time to see Tom about to be skewered by a Quinnica's nails. He leapt forward and shoulder-checked the guy into the door, falling on him with both claws. Tom's rage and humiliation at having to be rescued fueled his own attacks until he got a handle on his emotions. By that point, Sybil and Vic stopped shooting and the movement in the street stopped. The sounds of breathing filled the air as his pack tried to get their breath back. Shaggy felt that they were all okay over the bond, but he could tell that the fight had taken a lot out of them. Glancing around, he saw that Sybil and Vic were sporting scratch marks on their face and arms. While nearby, Cekrass and Rita were in rougher shape. The big lizard man was nursing a pretty rough-looking welt on his stomach while Rita's clothes were shredded from her green blouse to her blue jeans. Blood seeped over everyone's clothes. Shaggy's healing was helping them in places, but they were going to need a quick break before they tried that again. Kneeling down, Shaggy helped Tom to his feet and patted the slight man on the back. The usually verbose member of his pack was noticeably silent. Shaggy raised an eyebrow, but Tom waved him off and looted the bodies. Nodding, Shaggy moved to check the pockets of another dead Quinnica. "You weren't kidding, boss," Vic said. 3 headshots with the rifle to put one of these bastards down. 2 if you hit the eye," Sybil added. Shaggy grunted in acknowledgement as he collected the dead man's credits. The guy was holding more credit sticks than the average thug, which Shaggy didn't find surprising. These guys were members of one of the Big Four, so at least the monetary rewards weren't anything to sniff at. But they also didn't carry any weapons. My sword will not last much longer. Chopping through their bones is like cutting down a tree, Rita complained as she dug through pockets. I am going to have to get an upgrade, maybe the WHOA. Her shout of alarm brought everyone around to look at the older woman. She was sitting on her ass, slightly away from the body she was searching, doing a weird backward crawl as she tried to flee from the dead body. Shaggy moved over to help, but stopped at her horrified expression. What? What is it? Shaggy asked. All he got was a frantic pointing at the dead Quinnica's shirt. Looking over, Shaggy saw that the dead woman's shirt was moving. Right where Rita's sword had cut into the woman's ribs, the shirt was slowly drifting back and forth. Soon, a reddish-pink blob fell out of the tear in the woman's shirt and into the dirt. Shaggy recognized it as the Quinnica parasite that bonded with a host. As they all watched in disgusted fascination, the pink, 2-inch diameter orb stopped moving and shriveled up in the dirt. Tom gave a low whistle. His humiliation was forgotten. That was the symbiotic thing, right? Yeah. I've only seen it once before, and that one was larger, but it looked the same. Shaggy said. Blurg. Rita shouted in disgust, picking herself up. They let that thing crawl its way into their bodies? Shaggy shrugged as Cekrass flipped over a nearby body and looked it over. His lizard nostrils flared as he gave the body a sniff. They're strong. Lots would make the same choice for power, the taciturn lizard man said. Vic and Sybil nodded as Shaggy wobbled his head noncommittally. While he enjoyed the power he had in-game, he wasn't sure about carrying around a sentient alien co-pilot. Shaggy thought about the pack bond and wondered if that was also as invasive, but quickly shook it off. He had given each of them a choice, and they had accepted. Of course, now they were branded and intrinsically linked to him for who knew how long. A clump of dirt hit him on the side of the face and Shaggy sputtered as Tom's voice said. Stop that, boss. It's not the same. You haven't fundamentally changed our genetic makeup. Shaggy brushed the dirt from his face and looked at his pack. Apparently, his thoughts were clearly visible on his face or through their bond. Because each of his pack mates was staring at him like he was an idiot. The bodies had been looted and Shaggy could see his pack's wounds finish healing up before his eyes. He gave them a feral grin as he sighed internally. Well, I haven't yet. He let the sentence hang there for a bit until Rita snorted. Nice try at being ominous, boss man. But the fact we can feel your relief through the bond undercuts it. Shaggy shot her a mock glare and was about to say something when a noise ripped through the air. Aha! A high-pitched scream tore through the neighborhood. While most of the screaming and gunshots had been the normal, being attacked variety of Undertown, this one sounded like someone dying. Shaggy had to stop his real-world instinct to see what the problem was. He was a villain and bad guys don't run toward screams. Unless it benefits them, that is. Shaggy took a whiff of the air in that general direction and came up with the same mixed sense of the young Quinnica they had just fought. Quinnica that way, Shaggy said simply. The other gazed at him and then at each other. After a silent conversation that took seconds, Vic chambered a round into his rifle and nodded at Shaggy. Taking that as acceptance, Shaggy took off at a run as another ear-splitting scream rent the air. The voice was high-pitched, but Shaggy was sure it was male. Soon the scent trails in the air split and he could see that the Quinnica were attacking another yellow scent. Shaggy doubled his speed as the footsteps of his pack followed on as best they could. A third scream resounded through the dirt streets as Shaggy skidded around a corner. Two pale Quinnica were holding down a brownish humanoid as a third tried to force something onto their face. Shaggy centered his mind as best he could and charged forward. He felt his shoes and lower pants burst around his body as his hands transformed into claws. Without knowing how or when, Shaggy found himself airborne and on a collision course for one of the Quinnica. Instinct brought his legs up and he felt 4 sets of claws dig into the side of the man he hit. They both went to the floor as gunshots went off overhead. Just as they hit the dirt, Shaggy thrust his bottom legs down the Quinnica's body, ripping flesh and cloth as he tried to dig his front claws into the pale man's face. He felt the Quinnica under him quickly go limp and he glanced downward. His 2 legs were now in the half-wolf form. 2 massive wolf-like paws had shredded the poor alien's torso and ripped it away from his body completely. Shaggy had just enough time to be surprised before a searing pain hit the left side of his face. He felt the skin on his face rip free as something metal ripped into his cheek. His new oddly shaped wolfman legs caught him on reflex and kept him from going over. But the Quinnica that hit him was now clambering over his back and digging those metal claws down his back. Shaggy felt his flesh healing as he spun and tried to grab the squirrely bastard. But he couldn't get a hold with his own claws. "Hang on, boss." Cekrass' voice rumbled. Shaggy felt the body on his back get ripped away and turned in time to see Cekrass slam the slim, pale alien woman to the ground. Cekrass stomped on the woman's face, and when that didn't end things, he did it again. Shaggy moved to help and jammed his own foot paws into the woman's body, coming away with blood and bits of flesh and clothes. He kept a mental eye on his pack link, but felt that the others were doing fine with the last Quinnica. Although Tom was running a little hot emotionally. Shaggy stopped kicking with his new legs as he almost slipped in the pool of blood forming in the dirt. He turned his focus inward and tried to focus on canceling his transformation. Soon he felt the familiar twinge of pain from his hands and a new twist coming from his legs. Next thing he knew, he was standing barefoot in the dirt. The nearby Quinnica's blood running over his toes. He grimaced and moved over toward everyone as Rita stabbed her sword into the last Quinnica's back. Vic put 2 bullets into the Quinnica's legs as Rita and Sybil dragged him to his knees. Tom looked ready to smash the back of the pale alien's head in, but a thought from Shaggy stopped him. All 4 of his pack members glanced at him questioningly, but Shaggy simply moved toward the injured alien. Tom moved to help Sybil and Rita as they held the alien on his knees. "Hi friend. How's your day going?" Shaggy asked as he felt the holes in his face finally close. The man glared up at Shaggy as he continued to struggle against the others. Cekrass moved to help, but Shaggy waved him off. If the dude got free, they all could handle it. Vic was still standing down the road and Shaggy was sure to give the man a clear shot. Shaggy grew his claws again, careful to watch his feet in case he transformed them, too. When he didn't, he gave a sigh and jammed his claws into the Quinnica's shoulders. "Ahhh," the man screamed in pain, glaring hatefully at Shaggy. The Quinnica maintained a stony silence. So Shaggy twisted his knife-like claws. He felt the man's pale skin tear and he could feel his claws scrape the bone underneath. The Quinnica gave another howl of pain, but stayed annoyingly silent. Sighing, Shaggy was about to cut the man's throat and be done with it when a soft voice spoke up. "They wanted me to swallow that thing." Shaggy spun around and came face to face with a skinny man in a janitor's jumpsuit. The blue jumpsuit had some company logo on it and was slightly dirty. But the man seemed none the worse for wear. Shaggy had figured the guy would have run off when the fighting started. But apparently he was made of sterner stuff, or was just straight stupid. Shaggy turned his gaze to where the man was pointing. In the dirt was the device the Quinnica were trying to get the man to wear. It looked like a gas mask attached to a hose, which was then attached to a bottle with liquid in it. The Quinnica were clearly trying to get the mask over the man's face. Shaggy stared at the bottle and the living Quinnica symbiote contained within. The alien was small. Smaller than he had ever seen the pink orb and was floating in its jar silently. Shaggy turned a curious eye back to the Quinnica on his knees. The man simply glared, and Shaggy figured he would not answer any questions. He gave Rita and the others a quick nod, which resulted in several gunshots and the sound of a sword punching through flesh. Tom grunted in annoyance at not getting to rip the Quinnica's head off, but Shaggy sent the man calming thoughts through the link. Shaggy moved to pick up the mask and jar contraption as the others started looting. I just thanks?" The civilian man said as he slowly edged his way down the street. Shaggy made eye contact with the man, but said nothing as he turned his slow edging to a backwards walk, and then a full run. Vic caught Shaggy's eyes and gestured to his gun, but Shaggy shook his head. No sense in robbing janitors. They took enough shit already. Turning his attention to the quinnica in a jar, Shaggy studied the whole contraption. Raised voices from the others echoed in his ears, but he ignored it as the ramifications of what the quinnica were doing worked their way through his head. They were forcibly making more space vamps. Why? Smart money was on the recent power shifts in Undertown. But then why be so overt about what they were doing? Even without Shaggy's group around, the word about what they were doing would get out. Did they just not care? What did they need the soldiers for, and how were they going to ensure their loyalty? Shaggy racked his brains for a few seconds, but eventually he set the issue aside. All he could do was deal with the problems as they came to him. If they ran into more of the bastards trying this shit, they would put a stop to it. As for now, they had a living quinnica sample. That couldn't be easy to get. He briefly wondered what people would pay for the little alien in a jar. After studying the mask and jar apparatus, he disconnected the mask and tube from the jar, leaving only the quinnica in its weird solution. You already have a sword. Come on. Tom's raised voice sounded through the street. Grunting, Shaggy stood and walked over. As he approached, the two stopped arguing and Shaggy got a good look at what Rita was holding. It appeared to be a leather glove with metal claws attached to the fingers. Shaggy rubbed his cheek as he remembered the things tearing through his face. He turned a questioning gaze at Sybil and Vic. But it was Cekrass that answered him. Having finished piling the bodies, the lizard man walked over. The quinnica we killed. They had the glove attached to their hand. Shaggy nodded as he looked back at Tom and Rita. Rita looked a little miffed, but Tom was outright angry. She already has a weapon. A set of claws would be perfect for this pack's second-in-command. Tom puffed out his chest and made another grab for the glove. Rita snorted. If this pack had a second, it would be Ephemera, but she isn't part of the pack yet. So that means we don't have one. Meanwhile, I need a new weapon. Mine is about to break if we keep fighting these damn quinnica. That's not my fault. I don't even have a weapon. Well, what kind of dumbass walks around Undertown without at least a damn knife? Rita shouted back. Shaggy waved a hand in the air and silenced everyone. Glaring at them all, he asked. Who found it? Rita and the others all glanced at Cekrass. The large lizard man shifted under their combined gaze, but nodded somewhat reluctantly. Shaggy nodded. Okay, then that makes the glove Cekrass. In this pack, you keep what you kill when it comes to weapons and armor. But with money. A portion goes back to the gang, the others all said at the same time. Shaggy grinned at them, but Cekrass spoke up. I don't need them, boss. Besides, you killed her too. Yeah, but you're the one that pried her from my back. So I say it goes to you. What you do with it is your business, but there will be no infighting afterward. Am I clear? There was a general noise of assent as Rita handed the glove to Cekrass. The human-sized glove didn't look like it could even fit the big alien. Shaggy glanced back down at the jar in his hand and tried to weigh the pros and cons of continuing their hunt for quinnica. They needed to get the thing back to the lair, but they could be more of the asshats roaming the streets. Probably implanting more unwilling people. His thoughts were interrupted by Tom cheering. Turning, he saw Cekrass looking apologetically at Rita while the slim Tom danced around with his new glove. Rita looked a little annoyed, but nodded amiably at the big lizard. Shaggy grunted and came to a decision. Passing the jar to Vic, he ordered. You keep this safe while we hunt down the next group. Vic looked surprised, but nodded as he took the jar. Sybil reloaded her pistols and counted her magazines. Are you sure about that, boss? Shouldn't we get that home? We will, but on the way, we are going to hit every quinnica party we come across. I don't know what they are planning, but the fewer people they have to do it with, the better it will be for us. The others all nodded and dusted themselves off. Shaggy closed his eyes and sniffed the air. More blue and yellow scents crisscrossed through the air, and Shaggy sighed. It was going to be a long day of smacking space vamps around. Judging by the emotions humming through his pack bond, though, his pack was ready for it. Shaggy grinned and picked a scent before running off down the street. Shaggy and his pack met two more groups of Quinnica. Neither of which was forcing the alien parasite into people's faces, though. So Shaggy and his group only had the one jar as they headed back to the bar. His pack mates got some decent levels from the fights, though. Shaggy could see the improvements in the way the NPCs fought and dealt with the Quinnica. Rita and Cekrass were level 6, while Vic, Sybil, and Tom had jumped to level 5. They only had small loyalty increases, though. Cekrass was the closest of his pack, but was having trouble making it all the way to 100. Meanwhile, the others were all climbing steadily up. Shaggy couldn't wait to find out what a henchman pack member would be like. Maybe the typical pack boost would go up to 10% instead of 5. Shaggy spun past an opening door as he ran down the street. He figured it must be close to evening with all the people coming and going from their homes. Several people gave his pack sideways looks as they ran through the dirt streets. With their torn-up clothes and bruised faces, they probably made for a weird picture. Shaggy had been clawed up a few times in their subsequent fights. With Vic monitoring their alien in a jar, he wasn't firing as much as normal. So their overwatch was reduced to Sybil. Although Tom had some fun with his new claws. Shaggy wasn't sure what they were made of, but the things were sturdy enough to rip through the Quinnica. Shaggy slid to a stop as he approached the empty square around their bar. Off in the distance, he could hear the murmur of people, and they were even a good number heading in the same direction as them. He could feel his pack's shock as they walked out of the street and into the empty dirt square in front of the Viper's Denver. He was probably doing a poor job of hiding his own surprise. The square in front of the bar was sparsely packed with various humans and aliens. Shaggy was sure he recognized a few faces here and there. But mostly, they all appeared to be civilians trying to get into the bar. The Viper's Den was pretty busy when they had left, but now the bar and the square seemed full of people. Shaggy could make out table and chairs in the dirt just in front of the bar. He shared a look with the others before he barreled forward through the crowd. At the edges of the square, Shaggy could make out a few armed guards. Obviously, someone had set up security for the entire square. Shaggy wondered how many people were here for the bar versus how many were here for the protection the stationed guards brought. Tom rushed over to a guy standing at the entrance to an alley leading out of the square. He struck up a conversation as Shaggy pushed on. The smell of food hit his nostrils as he stepped closer to the makeshift patio dining area. Randomly dressed waitstaff took customers' orders while wearing surly looks on their faces. Shaggy grimaced as he thought they needed to find actual people to wait on tables. The thugs they were using now probably would not bring in a lot of customer. He could see a few more mildly behaved servers moving between tables, but they were going to have to hire more. Shaggy was pushing his way to the front door as people angrily shouted at him. Apparently, line cutting was a cardinal sin. He grit his teeth and prepared to push his way through the door guards, when a voice spoke up from near one of the outside tables. Boss? The employee entrance was just finished, the voice said. Shaggy spun and looked at the server in biker leathers. The man didn't seem familiar, but he was looking at Shaggy with an odd mix of fear and awe. Shaggy liked the look, so he moved closer, leaving the grumbling line of patrons at the front door. The leather-clad thug stood straighter as Shaggy drew close. Employee entrance? Yes, boss. Boss Ren had it put in. The evening rush can get a little crazy, as you can see. So he thought it best for us employees to have our own entrance. Shaggy smiled and nodded at the lackey. He turned to the others, who were all raising the eyebrows at the surrounding crowd. Vic was holding the alien jar close to his body and doing his best to keep it out of sight. I guess we are using the employee entrance then, Shaggy said, looking around. The thug noticed Shaggy's dilemma and pointed a finger toward the eastern side of the building. Shaggy nodded in thanks and started that way. He and his pack had to push past a few more people and circle around some of the outside diners. But it gave Shaggy a look at the food their bar was serving. Burgers and fries seemed to be the standard. Apparently, with Ephemera's Minotaur friends here, they were now a bar and grill. "Boss?" Rita said from behind him. "Hee hee. Inside first and then y'all can eat." Shaggy chuckled. His pack grumbled as they moved around the side of the building. Shaggy could understand. After hours of fighting space vamps, he was not only hungry but his regeneration could use a top-up. His new dermal armor had curtailed a lot of the damage the vamps were doing to him, but his healing had helped here and there. Shaggy found a small door with 2 guards. Both of whom were armed with pistols, which they held loosely, in their hands. Shaggy thought he was going to have to put someone through a door again. But one thug leaned over to the other and then they both moved out of the way. "Boss," one of them said, opening and holding the door. "Take whoever you can get a hold of and check it out." "Okay?" Slink was saying. "Gotcha, boss." A random thug next to Shaggy said. The thug turned and grabbed a couple of his friends before he rushed up the stairs toward the bar's interior. Shaggy tried to say something to Slink, but the boy was already passing a note over to a new set of thugs. Shaggy could guess what was happening and decided to let the boy work. A pale hand caught his attention and Shaggy moved around the war table to where Vlad, Ren, and Dave were seated. The table looked brand new and Shaggy wondered where they were getting the money for all these amenities. "Some of it is stolen." Ren answered his unasked question. "One of the lackeys knew where a warehouse was topside and our resident quest giver gave the order." Dave and Vlad smiled as Shaggy scratched his head and sat at the table, setting the jar down on the table. "But what tunnel did they use? Did the Quinnica let them through?" Vlad nodded as he drank from his blood-filled wine glass. "Yep. Apparently being at odds with the Fovamps doesn't stop them from taking our money. Or our trucks." Dave added. "Well, have to see how long that lasts, but for now they are content to rob us blind monetarily rather than go to war with us," Ren explained. "Also, you've seen the streets down here, Dave. Do you really want to navigate them in a truck? It'd be a pain in the ass," Vlad said. Shaggy glanced at everyone before he stared back at the jar on the table. It seemed odd that no one was mentioning it. But he let it go, as his own curiosity was getting to him. "So some lackeys went topside, stole a truck, stole some furniture and then ran it all the way back here? For what? Cloud and the gang? Also credits." Dave answered. "Thanks to everyone's donations, we have a decent amount of credits. Some of which the boy moves through that war table of ours to set up missions for the lackeys. He is slowly becoming the nexus for our entire operation. He is getting a shitload of loyalty with them too," Vlad said. Shaggy looked around for a drink. He spotted a server moving around with a platter of mugs and waved him down. Grabbing a mug, Shaggy took a sip of beer and asked another question. "What about the shitstorm going on topside? There were giant robots and cog drones moving around up there." Ren nodded amiably. "There were a couple days ago. You were out for close to 2 days. Remember, 1 day in the real world is 3 here. So the heroes mostly have things under control now. Except for the movement to remove HLO oversight. We have a few scouts up there, but getting information is slow going. Obviously. Would you stop? You look like someone poisoned your cat." Vlad chuckled. "Don't worry, we are still at a somewhat aggressive stance with the wannabe vamps. Yeah, they've hassled our guys out there a few times. But they are also good practice." Dave nodded happily. "Our guys have also." Ren started, reaching forward and grabbing the Quinnica jar. "Brought us a few of these. Apparently, the Quinnica are trying to expand. Forcibly." Shaggy confirmed as he finished his mug of beer. "They were damn near shoving the things down people's throats. Why did you bring it back here?" "The lackeys, I can understand. They thought we'd reward them, but I have no use for these parasites." Vlad said, looking at the jar disdainfully. Shaggy shrugged. Figured we could study or sell it. Who knows what we could figure out if we had the right skill set. Dude, none of us are like scientists, right? No, Dave. We're not, but we could maybe make a profit off them somehow. For now, let's just set them aside and discuss other business. Ren said, placing the jar back on the table. Such as? Shaggy asked. We thought we'd run as a group for a bit and go pay the space vamps a visit. They've been gracious enough to visit our territory. I thought we should visit theirs. Vlad grinned, showing his blood-stained teeth. Shaggy chuckled. Man, they really got under your skin, didn't they? Vlad bristled. Hey, the best way to have fun in this game is to poke the bear. So I figured we'd go poke this one. That they are a collection of fake wannabe space vampires doesn't even factor into it. Shaggy shared a dubious look with the others before he flagged down the wandering server for another beer. Dave and Ren smiled awkwardly as Shaggy drank. Vlad seemed a little nonplussed that the others didn't believe him. Shaggy was about to ask if the kid was coming when the boy's voice echoed from over his shoulder. Okay, folks. That's it for today. If you didn't get an assignment, see Ephemera or try to join a group in progress. Remember, whatever you make, the crew gets its cut. Always. Got that? There was a general murmur of acceptance from the crowd and soon Slink's pale, skinny body occupied a chair at their table. Shaggy grinned as he moved his beer over to the exhausted-looking boy. Slink glanced down at the amber liquid and shot Shaggy the stink eye. But before Shaggy could grab his mug back, Slink dove forward and tilted the glass into his mouth. Shaggy sputtered unintelligible as his beer was transformed into water by the system's age restrictions. The others chuckled as Slink downed the whole mug before slamming it on the table. It's what you get for being an ass, Vlad muttered. Shaggy just grumbled as he flagged down another server. So you're, like, really a kid, huh? Dave asked Slink as the boy wiped his mouth with a sleeve. 2 months and 20 days until I'm 18. Slink said. Shaggy collected his third drink from the server and downed a few gulps before he asked. So you coming with us or not? Slink looked at them, confused until Ren explained what they had planned. The pale kid shook his head at their plan. We should hold off. Intel says they've got an elder coming in a few days. I say we wait until that little visit is over. Scared of the big bad vamp? Shaggy asked, amused. Slink nodded. Yep. Ephemera tried to scout out their headquarters and couldn't even get close. They could sense her somehow. That was just the leaders that were here now. I don't want to think what an older one could do. I say we wait. Shaggy looked around the table. He could see the disappointment in everyone's eyes. They had really wanted to take it to the Quinnica. But the kid made a good point. If the space vamps could sense someone with Ephemera's abilities, it was probably best to get more information. Ren sat back in his extra-large chair, sighing. So what do we do? I kind of wanted to go out and cause some mayhem together. Slink nodded as he turned his head and thought. Well, we still owe that favor to Frank. Who? Everyone else at the table asked. The builder guy. We said we'd help him with a job after the bar was built. Well, the payments come due. He wants us to handle it. Shaggy scratched his head in thought before he remembered talking to the rotund builder. Vlad seemed to remember too as they both glanced back at Slink. That's topside. Shaggy groaned. Yep. Dave smiled and drummed the table. Sue, what did y'all promise the dude? Vlad sighed as he finished his glass of blood. He wanted us to ruin one of his competitors. Sounds like a piece of cake. Ren said, crossing his massive arms across his chest. Even if it is topside. Slink smiled. Actually, it could be fun. His competitor works as a subcontractor for one of the biggest construction companies in Austin. The bar will be fine. Unless some players come around, but I think the lackeys can handle that. Ren said. So who's this guy work for? Vlad asked, standing. Slink shrugged. Some weird company called DAD. Shaggy blinked as he stepped into the sunlight. He was back topside again, and he really wasn't sure how this trip was going to go. At least the Quinnica at the tunnel entrance hadn't given them any trouble, although Vlad gave them the stink eye the whole time. But the Quinnica seemed content to let them pass. Shaggy guessed that they were a minor annoyance to the Quinnica, for now. Vlad, Ren, Dave, and Slink stepped into the alley and blinked like Shaggy had. Most of them had taken a trip topside once or twice at this point. But getting used to the sun after days of constant darkness was a pain. Shaggy scratched his head and sighed as he listened to the hustle and bustle of the city beyond their alley. If he had to guess, it was probably close to evening, and the NPC population was heading home. The NPCs of simulated Austin had jobs, dreams, and even life goals. Thanks to the game's AI. It had created sub-AIs to run every NPC and let them grow as if they were normal people. Shaggy shuddered at the thought of it all. The processing power alone would have to be tremendous for the gaming company. He shook off the thought and switched his thoughts to thinking about their problem. Okay, so we have to find this damage assessment thing, right? That'll point us to the right guy? Slink sighed as Vlad and Ren shook their heads. Dave was happily walking toward the street outside the alley. The damage assessment division is just who the guy works for. We have the name of the guy's construction company. Spiegel Brothers Construction. So we take a walk that way and see what we can dig up. If the job seems too hard, we go back down and tell Frank we couldn't do it. How hard could it be? Vlad muttered, squinting his eyes against the sun. It's a construction company. We break a few trucks, injure a few people, maybe burn down a building. Then we head back down and go back to dealing with important shit. Like kicking space vamp ass. Let it go, vamps. We're here already. So let's make the most of it. Shaggy said. Before Vlad could respond, Dave ran back down the alley, wheeling his arms as he ran. He slid to a stop and panted as he grinned at all of them. Dudes, the streets are full of soups. It's awesome. Shaggy raised an eyebrow and glanced at the others. They all shared questioning looks until Ren pushed forward. The big alien headed for the entrance to the alley. The others all hurried to catch up and see what was going on. Shaggy figured that a few soups were out on patrol, but as he exited the alley, he saw how wrong he was. The street in front of the alley was full of hundreds of soups. Some were in flashy costumes, while others were in regular clothes. But all of them were marching northward, chanting and holding signs that read "Down with the HLO," and "Heroes don't need oversight." Shaggy grinned as he watched the obvious crowd of players draw the looks of everyone on street and everything in the sky. The drones were flying overhead, looking down on the marching crowd. Shaggy figured they were all headed to City Hall, or maybe they were just marching through the streets over and over. He shared a look with his friends before he took a few steps back into the alley again. They all smiled at one another as the marching soups continued to chant. Players. Ren said, shaking his head. They were only going to take that level of oversight for so long, Vlad said. Yeah, the forums don't make it seem like a good time, Dave agreed. Slink shrugged. It's the game. What do they think they are going to change? As I understand it, the HLO is a global organization. Yeah, but oversight in other places isn't as bad as it is here. I've read up on it in the forums, but really it doesn't concern us. We're villains. What the HLO does won't really affect us. Shaggy shook his head at Ren and sighed. Poor Ren, didn't you notice the drones? What about them? Dude, that crowd of butthurt soup players is drawing dozens of drones away from the other streets. If we keep an eye out, we can move with impunity. Shaggy explained. A look of realization dawned on everyone as they realized their job topside may have just become easier. Before, they had to keep an eye out for the buzzing bastards scanning the population of Austin. But now they could almost like regular citizens. Dave looked a little confused, as he had rarely been topside. But Ren and Vlad explained as Shaggy and Slink moved to the opposite end of the alley, away from the marching soups. Peering around the corner of the alley, Shaggy glanced north and south before he grinned. The street was quiet and practically, save for a few people moving toward the crowd of marching people. Cars lined the streets, and the buzzing of the HLO drones was nowhere to be heard. Shaggy saw a few businesses and shops still open in the street, but foot traffic was way down than what it had been. Shaggy looked at Slink and grinned. "We need a car," Slink said. "The construction company is to the south. Out of the city proper. We can't all ride your wolf form." Shaggy's grin fell as he glanced up at the approaching Ren and the others. The kid was right, but that meant they had a problem. "What kind of car is going to fit Ren?" Shaggy asked just as the large Paranadon caught up to them. "Hey," Ren complained. "They make specialty cars for larger alien body types. We have to find one if we want a car. Or else we're hoofing it." Vlad explained. "Do you see one, dudes?" Shaggy and the others glanced up and down the streets again. A few wheeled cars were parked on the street while some hover cars flew in the designated lanes above the sky. But none of them looked the right size. Not to mention, he wasn't even sure how they were going to hijack a flying car. "Nothing. Doesn't look like it," Vlad agreed. "So are we, like, walking?" Dave asked. Ren grunted as he stepped out of the alley. "We have another problem." Shaggy followed his large friend out of the alley and started walking south. He still kept an eye out for drones. But so far, the only sound was the low hum of the hover cars. Slink and the others followed behind them. The young boy asked, "What's that? Do any of us know how to hotwire car? Or even crack the computer system on one of the newer models?" Shaggy stopped walking as such an obvious problem slapped him in the face. He did not know how to hotwire a car, and he was sure the others didn't either. As he started walking again, he glanced around at the others, and they all shared chagrined looks. Except Dave, as the guy was still smiling at the towering buildings and the empty streets as he walked. Ren coughed as he nodded. "Yeah, thought not. So that means we have to mug the keys off someone, which means it will be reported and we'll have a speedster on us." "Bah, speedsters aren't so bad," Vlad argued. Shaggy shook his head. "No, they aren't. But they aren't supposed to be. They are there to slow you down while the soups rally the rest of their people. While we're dealing with one bastard, several more could be incoming. Which is a headache we don't need." Slink groaned as the setting sun beat down on them. "So what do we do?" Ren grunted as they walked southward out of the city. "Long term? We have to find a spot up here to make our own, then we get a collection of cars. That way, we'll have something for when we are up here. But short term, I think we're walking." Slink and Vlad groaned as Shaggy sighed. Meanwhile, Dave stepped out into the street and waved at a few cars heading southward. Shaggy watched as several cars ignored Dave and shook his head. Catching a ride was a good idea, but the chances of one being big enough for Ren were slim. At least he thought so until a large 18-wheeler with a long metal trailer pulled to a slow stop next to Dave. "Howdy," Dave said happily. The old man driving the extended cab truck stared down at Dave, not saying anything. Dave kept smiling as he reached into a pocket. "I have 150 credits if you can take me and my friends where we're headed." The old squinted down at the credit chips in Dave's hands for a long few seconds. Until finally, he nodded. "Big UNS gonna have to ride in the trailer. But the rest of y'all can get up in the cab." "Thank you kindly," Dave said, smiling as he turned back to the others. Shaggy's look of disbelief was still plastered on his face, and he would bet that the others all looked incredulous as well. But Slink seemed to shake off his surprise faster as he rushed forward. Vlad and Ren followed, moving to get the back of the trailer open so Ren could climb in. Slink was giving the driver the address as Dave and Shaggy climbed into the large cab. "Can't believe that worked." Shaggy muttered as he entered the large cab just behind the driver's seat. Why not? Dave asked as he sat on the small bed. Who is just gonna pick up a bunch of dudes wandering to a construction company? Earl D. Sisyphus. The old man's voice called toward the back of the cab. Shaggy and Dave turned to see their driver looking back at them as Vlad and Slink climbed into the passenger's side door. Once the two got situated, Earl eyed all of them. Once he had studied them to satisfaction, he turned back to his steering wheel and snorted. He threw the truck into gear and they slowly began moving. Earl grunted before saying, I don't really care what you boys are doing. But I feel I should tell you that construction work can be pretty demanding. Slink shot Dave and Shaggy a worried look from the passenger seat. But Shaggy understood the obvious lie the boy had told the old man. We're tougher than we look. Plus, with the city the way it is, they are going to need all the help they can get. Ain't that the truth? Earl grumbled. Entire city went to shit with all them robots running around. Then you have them corporate soups flying everywhere, saving people. Corporate? Yeah, you know them fancy pants soups in the snazzy outfits. All prim and proper like. More concerned with fulfilling quotas than saving lives. Earl explained. Shaggy racked his brain for an in-game company name he had heard before. It took a few seconds before he thought of one. Like K-Tech? Vlad nodded wisely. Yeah, and no one wants to mess with the HLO's big guns. Shaggy could hear the question in Vlad's tone. But, luckily, Earl seemed to miss it. No sense drawing attention for not knowing something they should have. Shaggy and his friends shared looks as they all racked their brains for notably blue aliens. Shaggy had a fleeting memory of a spandex-wearing blue man in the DA's office. The alien had been shouting down a few rambunctious players. He had seemed a little pompous and uptight. Shaggy filed the alien's looks away for later discussion and the cab fell into amiable silence as the large truck left the city. Vlad struck up idle conversation with Earl as they continued southward. Shaggy kept an ear on the conversation, but for the most part, he let his mind wander. They had a good foothold in Undertown, but when it came to above ground, they were woefully uninformed. Something else they were going to have to look into later. Hell, maybe he could log off for a day again and see what they came up with. He had been gone around 2 days in-game helping his wife set up her pod and the group had gotten themselves pretty entrenched. Not that he minded helping his wife. They always had a great time when they played together in other VR games. It was a passion they shared, and he was more than willing to miss a few days in the game to get her in sooner. But, man, he wasn't a fan of missing out on growing their burgeoning empire. Although as he thought about it, empire might have been too lofty of a word. Undertown was full of criminals of various stripes and attitudes. They were just a small section in a small part of the town. They still had to contend with 4 full-scale criminal organizations. Sure, the town was still reeling from the robot invasion. But once that was through, they were going in for tough times. At least Shaggy thought so. Thinking about the Viper's nest, Shaggy turned to Dave. The man was smiling benignly as he stared into nothing. Probably in his menus. Shaggy hoped. Are we sure the bar will be okay? Shaggy whispered. Dave started as he blinked away the menus he was looking at. Turning his gaze to Shaggy, Dave's smile grew wider. Of course, dude. The boys know how to handle themselves. Shaggy winced as Dave did not lower his voice. Vlad and Slink turned to gaze questioningly at the both of them. Shaggy grinned and waved them off. Just worried about the people back home, you know? Hoping nothing comes up that they can't deal with. Vlad nodded as Slink looked over at Earl. The old truck driver was keeping his eyes on the road. But Shaggy was sure the old man was listening intently. They'll be fine. Petra is an excellent manager and Ephemera is on security. Even if she steps away for a bit, they're still the sisters. Slink said. Shaggy nodded and let the conversation drop. He wasn't sure how far Rashi and her sisters would go to defend their bar, but he didn't want to discuss it here. Dave had gone back to looking through his menus while the others turned to look out the front window. Shaggy was sure Dave had a browser open, was watching videos or something. He sighed as he sat back in his slim chair. The drive was long and quiet. Vlad and Earl held several small conversations as the vampire tried to pry various bits of information from the truck driver. Slink was watching the exchange intently, clearly intent on learning from Vlad's questioning techniques. Shaggy bemoaned his own lack of a view before he thought of Ren in the trailer behind them. He grinned as the truck slowed down. Shaggy tried to look out a small window in the cab, but all he could see were enormous fields. There were a few large buildings in the distance, but nothing that looked like a construction company. Everyone in the cab turned to look at the old man as the truck pulled to a full stop. Earl engaged the parking brake and looked at them all. "All right, boys, this is as far as I can take you. Your destination is further out that way," he said, pointing to the west. Shaggy and the others nodded as they clambered out of the cab. Dave handed the old man his promised credits and then jumped to the street as Vlad went to let out Ren. Shaggy stretched his legs a bit and took a big whiff of the air. Very faint scent trails crisscrossed through the air, but mostly he smelled gasoline and rubber. He was obviously too far to get a decent scent, but the smells he saw intrigued him. They were the usual mix of blue and yellow scents, but in the direction they were going, there were a lot of them. Probably proving Earl's statement that the construction company was out that way. Once Ren had joined them, Earl pulled away. Dave rapidly waved goodbye at the truck as Shaggy and the others started walking through the grass straight for where Earl had pointed. "Lot of people out that way," Shaggy said, pointing at his nose. "Anything dangerous?" Shaggy shook his head. "Can't really tell with just smell. At least, not yet. All I know is that there are a lot of aliens and humans out that way." Vlad snorted. "There's a lot of people everywhere. What good is it if you can't tell who's dangerous? Hey. A predator doesn't know his prey is dangerous until he tries to take it down." Slink furrowed his brow. "Is that true?" Ren shook his head. "Probably not, but it sounds like it is, and I'm sure that's all he cares about." Shaggy threw up his hands. "Screw you guys, then. See if I tell you anything I learned from my enhanced senses again." "Aw, don't sweat it, Shag dude. I thought it was nice to know." "Thanks, Dave." They continued chatting as they made their way across the grassy plain. It was a rare bit of flora surrounded with the metal and brick of modernity. Warehouses and brick building rose in the distance and Shaggy could smell the dust in the air as they walked closer. Slink zeroed in on a large red brick building and singled it out as their destination. Shaggy raised an eyebrow at the white brick fence surrounding the property, but they continued forward. Once they had gotten to a street running alongside the building, they followed toward a group of warehouses. Shaggy could see dozens of scents in the air, combined with the smells of gas, sweat, and metal. The sound of heavy machinery resounded as forklifts zipped around the various warehouses. The big man was blocking their view, but once Shaggy and the others got around him, they all made sounds of agreement. "Shit. Whoa, dudes. It's not so bad." They all turned and glared at Slink. The young man winced at their combined looks. Although Dave was still smiling, even he looked a little incredulous at Slink's statement. Shaggy turned back toward the entrance to the building, where a large sign read, "Spiegel Brothers Construction." He waved a hand at the assembled guards in front of the building. All wearing black laminate armor. An armor they had all seen once before. In a junkyard. Slink looked between Shaggy and the guards a few times before he sighed and nodded his head. Everyone let out a collective breath as things calmed down. They really didn't need to be standing outside a building guarded by K-Tech, holding an argument. Shaggy was turning when a harsh voice sounded from behind them. "Hey! What are you lot doing here?" "Oh, sweet shit," Shaggy grumbled,